Welcome to Evolution History Hub. Tonight, we drift back through 5,000 years of wonder and silence, across the endless sands, where the pyramids touch the stars and the Nile whispers secrets only time remembers. From the first kings who shaped stone and faith, to the lost queens whose names still echo in the halls of eternity, every grain of sand holds a story. So close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let Egypt unfold, not in noise, but in quiet majesty. You're watching Evolution History Hub. Like, subscribe, and let the ancient world guide you to sleep. Tonight, instead of marching into battles or castles, we'll walk along the timeless Nile, where the river shaped one of the greatest civilizations in history. From humble farmers sowing fields to pharaohs raising monuments that touched the sky, we'll drift through thousands of years of Egyptian life. You'll hear the whispers of priests in sacred temples, the songs of labourers hauling stone, and the myths of gods who watched over it all. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe. But only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is out there, closing their eyes to the same story. So, settle in. Let the world grow quiet. And let's begin at the banks of the Nile, where civilization itself awoke. Picture it. Egypt, long before the pyramids, before Cleopatra's dramatic farewell, before even the idea of a pharaoh existed. Imagine a land where the desert stretched endlessly on both sides, hot and lifeless, and yet right through the middle ran a thin green ribbon of life, the Nile. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been just another sandy wasteland. With it, however, Egypt became one of the world's earliest great civilizations. If you're listening to this while trying to drift off, let me assure you, we'll take things slowly. Think of this as a gentle stroll down the riverbank, rather than a mad dash across the desert. The Nile is the key to understanding Egypt. Every summer, like clockwork, the river would flood its banks, spilling dark, fertile silt onto the surrounding fields. That soil, rich and damp, was perfect for growing wheat and barley. In fact, this yearly miracle is why Herodotus, the Greek historian, famously called Egypt the gift of the Nile. Though I rather suspect the Nile itself might have wanted a little credit. The Egyptians, for their part, personified the river in the form of Hapi, a god with a rather rotund figure, a pleasant smile, and an armful of crops. One might say he looked less like an all-powerful deity and more like a jolly gardener. But then again, isn't that exactly the kind of god you'd want to look after your harvest? Now, the earliest Egyptians weren't pyramid builders or grand temple architects. Around 6000 BCE, they were simply farming folk who had learned that if you stayed near the Nile, you stood a much better chance of eating regularly. They built small villages, learned to domesticate animals, and figured out irrigation long before the word itself was ever invented. They dug canals, stored water, and learned that the rhythm of life was tied to the river's rise and fall. In a way, you could say that time itself flowed with the Nile. Of course, where there's a river, there's also the occasional bit of mischief. The Egyptians believed that while Hapi brought abundance, other forces lurked as well. In their mythology, chaos was embodied by the serpent Apophis, an enormous snake who tried nightly to devour Ra, the sun god, as he sailed across the sky. Thankfully, Ra usually won, or else this story, and indeed the planet, would be rather short. But the underlying point was clear. Life in Egypt was about balance. Too much flood, and fields washed away. Too little, and famine stalked the land. Just the right amount, and everyone feasted. A delicate equilibrium, what the Egyptians later called ma'at, the principle of cosmic order. Now, speaking of order, we ought to discuss the people who first tried to bring some of it to Egypt. Before there was a single Egypt, there were two lands, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. Yes, it's upside down if you're looking at a map. But remember, the Nile flows north into the Mediterranean, so upper meant upstream. If you ever want to confuse a geography student, that's the way to do it. These two regions each had their own kings, customs and gods. Upper Egypt favoured the vulture goddess Nekhbet, while Lower Egypt leaned toward the cobra goddess Wadjet. Both creatures ended up as symbols on the pharaoh's crown when the two lands were finally united. But that, dear listener, is a story for a later chapter. At this early stage, around 5000 to 4000 BCE, Egypt was still a patchwork of communities. They buried their dead with simple pottery, beads, and the occasional pet goat. Archaeologists call this the pre-dynastic period, which is a fancy way of saying before things got properly organised. Yet even in these humble graves, you can see hints of what was to come. The care with which they laid out bodies, painted pottery with spirals and boats, and placed food for the afterlife, all point to a belief that death was not the end. It was simply a continuation, like boarding a ferry across the Nile, but one that led to a much stranger, more mysterious destination. Mythology already shaped this worldview. The Egyptians told stories of Osiris, the god who was murdered by his jealous brother Set, only to be resurrected by his devoted wife Isis. Osiris then became ruler of the underworld, judging the souls of the dead. Though this myth wasn't fully written down until later, its roots may stretch all the way back to these early times. It's not hard to imagine villagers telling one another around the fire, "Live well, honour the gods, and you'll join Osiris in the field of reeds," their version of paradise, with endless harvests and no shortage of beer. Beer, by the way, was essential. The Egyptians brewed it thick and sweet, almost like liquid bread. Even workers on construction projects were paid in loaves and beer rations. One might say that civilization itself was partly built on barley. Without beer, the pyramids might never have risen, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. As the centuries flowed along like the river itself, communities grew larger. Trade expanded. Boats became more sophisticated, gliding along the Nile like waterfowl. Egyptians exchanged goods with Nubia to the south, bringing in gold, ivory, and exotic animals. From the Sinai, they obtained turquoise. All of this movement along the river gave rise to a shared culture, shared deities, and eventually the idea that perhaps one ruler should oversee it all. Religion was never far from daily life. Shrines dotted the landscape, often simple mud brick structures with offerings of bread, beer, and fruit. Gods were everywhere. Falcons in the sky reminded people of Horus. Cats prowling near granaries suggested Bastet was watching over their food, and the ever-present sun reminded them that Ra was sailing overhead. It was a landscape alive with divinity, each natural phenomenon explained through myth. To us, it might seem fanciful. To them, it was as real as the sand under their sandals. Let us not forget writing. Around 3200 BCE, Egyptians developed hieroglyphics, those beautiful, intricate symbols that adorn tombs and temples for millennia. But the very earliest writing was humble, used for keeping accounts, tallies of grain, livestock, and labour. It seems the first reason humans ever bothered to write was not for poetry or storytelling, but for bureaucracy. A rather boring truth, though perhaps fitting for our purposes. Still, even bureaucracy carried a sacred air. The Egyptians believed words themselves had power, a concept they called heka, magic. To write a god's name was to invoke that god's essence. To carve a spell into a tomb was to ensure safe passage in the afterlife. Language was never just language, it was a bridge between worlds. Life along the Nile continued this way for centuries. Floods, harvests, rituals and stories. The rhythm was slow, steady, dependable. And though kingdoms rose and fell, though myths shifted and rulers changed, the Nile's eternal flow tied it all together. One might almost say it was Egypt's lullaby, an endless reassuring murmur that told its people, as long as the river runs, life will go on. Of course, not everything was serene. Animals posed their own dangers. Crocodiles lurked in the water, worshipped and feared as Sobek, a god of fertility and ferocity. Hippos too were dangerous, and Set, the god of chaos, was sometimes associated with their unpredictable rage. Imagine living in a world where the river was both your saviour and the home of creatures that could swallow you whole. It was a relationship built on respect, reverence, and no small amount of caution. Meanwhile, the stars above told their own stories. Egyptians noticed Sirius, the brightest star, rising just before the Nile floods each year. They called it Sopdet, and later associated it with the goddess Isis. Thus, astronomy and mythology intertwined, giving people a way to predict the river's behaviour. In a land where survival depended on timing the floods, this was nothing short of life-saving knowledge, wrapped, as always, in divine narrative. By around 3100 BCE, Egypt stood on the brink of transformation. Villages had grown into city-states, each with its own chieftain, priesthood, and local god. Rivalries brewed, alliances shifted, and the two great regions, Upper and Lower Egypt, prepared for a final reckoning. The stage was set for the rise of the first pharaohs, and for Egypt to step firmly into history. But that, dear listener, is for the next chapter. For now, close your eyes and picture the Nile at dusk, the river glowing with reflected sunlight, farmers returning home with baskets of grain, priests offering prayers at humble shrines, and the comforting sense that the river would rise again tomorrow, just as it always had. In the stillness of that eternal rhythm, Egypt found its beginning. And perhaps in that same rhythm, you might find yourself drifting gently towards sleep. When we left off, Egypt was still finding its feet. Villages hugging the Nile, myths weaving their way into everyday life, and the first hints of kingship beginning to stir. Now we move to something that lay at the very heart of the Egyptian world. Their gods, their rulers, and that great, glittering idea of cosmic balance known as Mayat. If Chapter 1 was the Nile's gift of bread and beer, Chapter 2 is the recipe for Egypt's soul. The Egyptians didn't see gods as distant figures lounging in some abstract heaven. To them, divinity was woven into the very fabric of life. Every sunrise was Ra steering his solar bark across the sky. Every flood was Hapi swelling the Nile's banks. And every jackal slinking through a desert whispered the presence of Anubis, guardian of the dead. This closeness between gods and the natural world made life deeply religious, but also oddly comforting. Imagine never once wondering if the gods existed, because, well, there they were, in the river, in the sun, and in the cat eyeing your supper. Now, about this concept of Ma'at. Ma'at was not just a goddess, though she was indeed personified as a woman with a feather on her head. She was also a principle, a cosmic law, the very glue that held the universe together. Ma'at meant truth, order, and balance. In a world where the Nile's flood could be generous one year and miserly the next, Ma'at was the reassurance that overall things worked as they should. It was the king's sacred duty to uphold Ma'at. And here we begin to see how myth and kingship fused into something uniquely Egyptian. For the Egyptians, the pharaoh wasn't merely a man. He was divine, an earthly Horus, the falcon god, reigning with sharp eyes and swift talons. Upon his death, he merged with Osiris, lord of the underworld, while his heir became the new Horus. In this way, the pharaoh was a living bridge between heaven and earth. It's a rather clever arrangement when you think about it. A king who claims divine backing tends to have fewer arguments from his subjects. Why must I pay taxes? Because Ra himself insists. Hard to argue with that. The king's role was enormous. He didn't simply rule in the political sense. He was expected to perform rituals, offer sacrifices, and keep the gods appeased. If the Nile failed to flood, people might wonder whether their pharaoh had done something wrong. Imagine being blamed for the weather every year. One wonders how often pharaohs muttered privately about the river's fickleness. Yet for all the pressure, the system worked, because it gave the people a sense that their king's actions were tied directly to the well-being of the land. Now let's talk about the gods themselves, because Egypt had quite the divine cast. At the top was Ra, the sun god, endlessly important in a land where the sun could both nurture crops and scorch fields to dust. Then there was Osiris, the green-skinned god of the afterlife, and his wife Isis, the great mother and magician, whose devotion brought Osiris back to life after Set dismembered him. Their son, Horus, with his falcon head and piercing gaze, symbolized kingship itself. And Set, poor maligned Set, god of chaos, storms and desert, forever cast as the villain. Though in fairness, if you've ever tried walking across the Sahara, you might agree chaos and desert go hand in hand. Temples soon rose across the land. They were not churches for congregations as we think of them, but cosmic engines. Each temple was a microcosm of the universe, built to house the presence of a god. The priests performed rituals daily, bathing the god's statue, clothing it, feeding it offerings of bread, beer, and meat. One can't help but smile at the thought of gods being tended to like very pampered houseguests. Another loaf, Ra, a jug of beer for you, Osiris. Yet these acts weren't seen as quaint. They were essential for keeping the cosmos in balance. If the gods were pleased, Egypt prospered. But kingship was not simply religious theatre. It was also a practical system of governance. The pharaoh was at the top of a hierarchy that included viziers, governors, and scribes. Scribes especially deserve a mention, for they were the literate class, wielding reed pens and ink to record taxes, decrees, and epic tales. Literacy was rare, and those who mastered it held immense power. To write was to shape reality itself. Remember, words had Heka, magical force. And oh, the rituals of kingship. At coronation, the pharaoh donned the double crown, uniting the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. He smote enemies in ceremonies that symbolized Egypt's dominance over chaos. He dedicated statues, raised obelisks, and carved his likeness on temple walls for eternity. If it all sounds a bit excessive, bear in mind the desert was very good at preserving monuments. Once you carved your image in stone, it tended to stick around, much like a cosmic business card for future archaeologists. It's worth pausing here to consider myth as a political tool. The story of Osiris, Isis, and Horus was not only a gripping tale of murder, resurrection, and divine justice. It was also a model for kingship. Just as Horus avenged his father and restored order, so too was each new pharaoh expected to embody Horus and keep Set's chaos at bay. Myth legitimized rule, reassured the people, and gave divine context to the otherwise messy business of politics. And speaking of messy business, life was not all grand rituals and cosmic order. Ordinary Egyptians lived within this religious framework, but their lives were filled with more practical concerns: farming, baking, brewing, weaving. Still, they called upon the gods in small ways. Amulets shaped like the eye of Horus for protection. Prayers to Bez, the dwarf god of households, who, with his grinning face and lion mane, looked more like a party guest than a divine protector. But Bes was beloved because he guarded families from illness and misfortune. This fusion of grand theology and everyday devotion gave Egyptian religion a remarkable depth. It wasn't abstract philosophy tucked away in scrolls. It was lived. The gods were in the Nile's flood, in the temple rituals, in the amulets around children's necks, and in the very heartbeat of kingship. The worldview shaped by Ma'at and myth also influenced law. Egyptian justice aimed at restoring balance rather than punishment for its own sake. Court cases were often decided with Ma'at in mind. Truthfulness and fairness were not only legal virtues, they were cosmic duties. Imagine a courtroom where lying under oath didn't just risk perjury, but cosmic disorder. Suddenly, honesty seems far more appealing. As the early dynastic period unfolded, around 3100 to 2686 BCE, Egypt solidified into a unified kingdom. The first dynasties established Memphis as the capital near the apex of the Nile Delta. From here, pharaohs administered their growing state, conducting rituals, expanding trade, and commissioning tombs that grew ever more elaborate. The seeds of pyramid building were being sown, and through it all, mythology gave meaning. Each act of governance, each harvest, each war was framed in terms of divine order. When Egypt triumphed, it was because Ma'at was upheld. When drought struck, it was a sign the pharaoh had to redouble his offerings. Life was not random. It was a dialogue between humans, gods, and the cosmos. Let us close this chapter by returning to the concept of Ma'at. At the end of life, Egyptians believed the soul faced the weighing of the heart. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, would place the heart on one side of a scale, with Ma'at's feather of truth on the other. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it tipped the scale, and the monster Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, would devour it. If the heart balanced, the soul passed into the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal harvest. This final judgment wasn't just about the afterlife. It reflected an entire worldview. Live truthfully, honour Ma'at, and the universe itself would remain in harmony. So, in Chapter 1, we had the Nile shaping Egypt's body. Here, in Chapter 2, we see the gods, kings, and Ma'at shaping its soul. Together they created a civilization unlike any other, one that believed the divine was as close as the sunrise and as steady as the river's flow. And with this cosmic order firmly in place, Egypt was ready for its first great age of stone and glory. But that tale, the age of pyramids and eternal rest, awaits us in the next chapter. For now, let the quiet thought of Ma'at's balance settle in your mind. A world where truth weighs as lightly as a feather, and harmony holds even the desert at bay. Perhaps, as you drift into sleep, you'll feel a little of that cosmic order yourself. Egypt, as history tells us, wasn't always one unified kingdom of pyramids and golden masks. For much of its earliest life, it was divided into two very different worlds. In the south lay Upper Egypt, a narrow valley hugging the Nile, bordered by rocky cliffs and endless desert. To the north sprawled Lower Egypt, the wide, fertile marshlands of the delta, where papyrus reeds grew thick and water spread into countless branches before meeting the Mediterranean. Two lands, two peoples, and for centuries, two crowns. Each had its own rulers, its own gods, and its own sense of identity. Yet destiny, or perhaps just ambition, would bring them together into a single kingdom under the first pharaohs. This moment of unification would become the foundation for one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. The name most often linked with this transformation is Narmer, sometimes remembered as Menes. Around 3100 BCE, Narmer emerges from the shadows of prehistory as the man who welded together Upper and Lower Egypt into one state. Our proof comes from a remarkable carved relic, known as the Narmer palette, a ceremonial slab of stone that seems less like art and more like a political manifesto. On one side, Narmer wears the tall white crown of Upper Egypt as he smites an enemy, the eternal pose of a conqueror. On the other side, he dons the flat red crown of Lower Egypt, parading in triumph. It's the ancient world's equivalent of a campaign poster, though with rather more violence than a smiling handshake. This act of unification was more than a simple conquest. It changed the course of human history. Before Narmer, Egypt was a patchwork of villages, towns, and local rulers, each fending for itself. After Narmer, it became one of the world's first centralized states. Suddenly, there was one king, one administration, and one vision. The Egyptians celebrated this new identity with a symbol, the double crown, called the Shent, which fused the red and white crowns into one somewhat extravagant piece of headwear. It was a visual shorthand for a revolutionary idea: one land, one people, one ruler. Religion played an important part in this story. To the Egyptians, politics and myth were inseparable. Narmer's victory wasn't just a military triumph, it was cosmic order made manifest. In their worldview, the universe depended on balance, a principle they called Ma'at. Division and disorder represented chaos, the domain of the god Set. Unity and harmony were signs of Ma'at, maintained by Horus, the falcon god of kingship. Narmer, like the pharaohs who followed him, was seen as Horus in human form, restoring balance to the two lands. Just as Horus had defeated Set to avenge his father Osiris and bring peace to the cosmos, Narmer had defeated rival kings and restored order on Earth. The choice of a capital city reflected this symbolic victory. Near the border where Upper and Lower Egypt met, Narmer, or perhaps his immediate successors, founded the city of Memphis. This was a strategic spot, commanding access to both the Delta and the Nile Valley. It was also a statement. The ruler would stand at the meeting point of both worlds, binding them together. Later legends claim that Narmer, or Menes, even diverted the Nile to create the site, which may be a little exaggerated. Nonetheless, Memphis grew into a thriving hub of government, trade and religion, anchored by the cult of Ptah, the god of craftsmen and creation. The pharaohs of the first and second dynasties, successors of Narmer, began to shape Egypt into the civilization we recognize today. They organized agriculture on a grand scale, building granaries and overseeing irrigation systems. Taxes were levied in grain, collected by officials, and redistributed in times of scarcity. Trade expanded to distant regions. Gold and incense came from Nubia, timber from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and copper from the Sinai. These early kings created not just a political state, but also an economic network that tied Egypt to the wider ancient world. Evidence of their power can still be seen in their tombs. At Abydos, the burial ground of the early pharaohs, vast mud brick tombs called mastabas were built, stocked with goods for the afterlife. Some contained pottery, jewellery, and furniture. Others, more chillingly, included the bodies of servants who had been sacrificed to serve their king in eternity. It was a grim reflection of the belief that the pharaoh's authority extended beyond death itself. The king was not merely a ruler in life. He was destined to be Osiris in death, lord of the underworld, continuing his reign forever. This mythology of kingship became increasingly elaborate. The pharaoh was Horus while alive, ruling over the living as the falcon god did from the sky. Upon death, he became Osiris, descending into the underworld to rule the dead. His successor, meanwhile, took up the mantle of Horus, continuing the cycle. In this way, the succession of kings mirrored the eternal rhythm of myth, reassuring Egyptians that cosmic balance was maintained generation after generation. Even the geography of Egypt seemed to echo these myths. Upper Egypt, with its high cliffs and harsh deserts, embodied the lofty domain of Horus, the falcon soaring above. Lower Egypt, with its tangled marshes and unpredictable waterways, carried the chaotic energy of Set. To unite the two was to reconcile order and chaos, light and darkness, life and death. No wonder the Egyptians saw their pharaohs as divine figures. Only gods in human form could manage such a feat. For ordinary Egyptians, the unification subtly reshaped daily life. Farmers now paid their taxes in grain, which supported the state's growing bureaucracy. Scribes, those literate few who mastered the art of hieroglyphs, recorded everything from harvest yields to religious rituals. Artisans built temples and crafted goods for both royalty and gods. Soldiers guarded trade routes and defended the borders. It may not sound thrilling, paperwork and farming rarely do, but this structure created the foundation for Egypt's astonishing longevity as a civilization. Still, grandeur was never far away. The early kings experimented with monumental building, setting the stage for the later pyramids. Royal names were enclosed in oval rings called cartouches, symbols of eternity. Even in these early centuries, Egypt was cultivating its obsession with permanence, with leaving behind something that would endure for millennia. And remarkably, it worked. We are still discussing Narmer over 5,000 years later. Few politicians today can hope for such staying power. Of course, unification wasn't a one-time event carved neatly into the stone of history. The process was messy, with rebellions, rival claimants, and shifting alliances. Later kings of the First Dynasty sometimes faced uprisings from the Delta, suggesting that not everyone was thrilled about this new order. Yet the idea of a united Egypt proved resilient. The double crown endured, and pharaohs continued to proclaim themselves lords of the two lands. The concept had taken root too deeply to be undone. By the time the Second Dynasty came to an end, Egypt was no longer just a land of farmers and villages. It was a state with bureaucracy, religion, and a powerful monarchy at its centre. The groundwork had been laid for the monumental age to come, the Old Kingdom, the era of pyramid building and dazzling wealth. But before that golden age could begin, Egypt needed something even more valuable than stone or gold. It needed the belief that one ruler, one crown, and one kingdom could embody the balance of the universe. Narmer had given them that belief, and in doing so, he gave birth to pharaonic Egypt. So it was that the two crowns, once rivals, were merged into a single symbol of power. The king, both man and god, ruled in the name of Horus on earth and Osiris in the afterlife. The Nile continued to flood, the fields continued to yield grain, and the people, for the most part, accepted their place in the cosmic order. A new chapter in human history had begun, one that would echo down the millennia. Egypt was no longer two lands. It was one eternal kingdom. Let us begin with the Old Kingdom, that glittering age often called the Age of the Pyramids. Around 2600 BCE, Egypt found itself under the rule of the Fourth Dynasty, and with it came rulers of extraordinary ambition: Sneferu, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. These names may not trip off the tongue as easily as Tutankhamun or Cleopatra, but without them, Egypt's skyline would look very different indeed. Sneferu, for instance, was something of an architectural experimenter. He began with a structure known to us today as the bent pyramid, because halfway through construction, the builders realized their angle was far too steep and had to adjust it rather dramatically. The result looks like a pyramid trying to correct its posture after slouching. Later, Sneferu perfected his technique with the red pyramid, a smoother, more elegant attempt that still stands proudly today. Khufu, Sneferu's son, went one better, or rather quite a lot better. He commissioned what we now call the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of them all. For centuries, it was the tallest structure in the world, towering at over 480 feet. Imagine a skyscraper, but without glass, steel, or lifts. Just millions of limestone blocks, each weighing a ton or more, stacked with an accuracy that still baffles modern engineers. If you find yourself wondering how on earth they managed it, you're not alone. Scholars still debate the precise methods, though ramps of some sort are the most popular theory. Personally, I suspect coffee and motivational speeches may have helped as well, though the records are suspiciously silent on that point. The Great Pyramid wasn't just big, it was a cosmic statement. The Egyptians didn't build pyramids simply to house the bodies of kings. They were conceived as vehicles for eternity, stairways to the heavens. The sloping sides mirrored the rays of the sun, pointing the deceased pharaoh toward the afterlife, where he would join Ra the sun god, in his daily voyage across the sky. Inside, the passageways and chambers were arranged with symbolic care. The king's burial chamber, deep within, was the heart of this stone mountain, guarded by granite blocks and hidden corridors. To enter uninvited was, in theory, impossible. Of course, in practice, tomb robbers have always been a rather determined breed. Khafra, Khufu's son, built the second Great Pyramid of Giza, slightly smaller but still impressive. He also left us that enigmatic guardian of the plateau, the Great Sphinx. Carved from the bedrock itself, it bears the body of a lion and the face of a king, likely Khafra's own. The Sphinx was a symbolic protector, a kind of eternal bodyguard with a stone stare. It's also worth noting that the Sphinx has suffered a bit over the millennia. Its nose is missing, its beard is broken, and countless tourists have speculated about its secrets. Yet, despite its weathering, it remains a haunting emblem of Egypt's ancient soul. Menkaure, Khafra's successor, built the third and smallest pyramid at Giza. One might imagine he was being frugal, though his tomb was still rather monumental by any reasonable measure. His pyramid was originally encased in granite rather than limestone, which must have glistened in the sun like a jewel. His queens were given their own pyramids nearby, reflecting the royal household's importance in eternal life. But let us pause here for a moment, because the pyramids, as physical as they are, cannot be understood without their mythological framework. To the Egyptians, the afterlife was not some vague spiritual realm. It was as real and structured as life itself, governed by gods, rituals, and laws. When a king died, he became Osiris, ruler of the underworld. His son and successor became Horus, who defended the throne and the realm. This eternal cycle mirrored Egypt's unbroken chain of rulers. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was the physical embodiment of this myth, a place where the king could undergo his transformation into a god. Within the burial chamber, treasures were laid: food, drink, clothing, furniture, and sometimes even boats, all the comforts a royal soul might need in the next world. Most importantly, priests conducted rituals to ensure the king's ka, or life force, could safely make the journey. Spells were recited, incense was burned, and offerings were made. It was all rather elaborate, but then again, eternity is a long time to prepare for. The pyramid's alignment with the stars added another layer of cosmic meaning. The shafts leading out of Khufu's pyramid, for instance, appear to point toward Orion's belt and Sirius, celestial markers tied to Osiris and Isis. To lie in a pyramid was to lie at the center of a cosmic map, one that connected heaven and earth. This was no mere grave. It was a launch pad for divinity. One might be tempted to imagine the construction of these monuments as endless toil under the lash of overseers. But archaeology has revealed a more nuanced picture. The builders were not slaves in chains, as once popularly believed, but largely skilled labourers, well-fed and organised. Villages near Giza show evidence of bakeries, breweries, and medical care for the workers. They lived in a community with its own rhythm, their labour framed as a sacred duty for their king, and, by extension, for the gods. Still, it must be said, hauling enormous limestone blocks in the blazing sun was hardly anyone's idea of a pleasant day out. Over the centuries, pyramid building evolved. Later dynasties experimented with smaller pyramids, more modest in size and construction. As time went on, the expense and complexity of these giant structures proved unsustainable. Eventually, kings opted for hidden tombs cut into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, trading grandeur for secrecy in the hope of deterring grave robbers. But for a shining moment in the Old Kingdom, the pyramid reigned supreme as the ultimate expression of pharaonic power. There is something quietly comforting about the pyramids, isn't there? They are, after all, remarkably simple shapes, just 4 sides and a point, and yet they carry an aura of mystery and eternity that more elaborate monuments often lack. Standing at their base, one feels both very small and very connected to the vast story of humanity. They are reminders that thousands of years ago, people were already grappling with questions of mortality, divinity, and legacy. And, like us, they express their answers through architecture, ritual, and a fair bit of wishful thinking. One of the most charming myths about the pyramids comes from later travellers. The Greeks, awed by their scale, believed they must have been built by demigods or under magical influence. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, visited in the 5th century BCE and recorded stories about their construction involving ramps and endless manpower. Some of his tales veered into the fantastical, but they show how even in antiquity, the pyramids had already taken on an aura of wonder. Today, of course, the pyramids are still with us, silent guardians of the desert, survivors of sand, wind, and time. Tourists flock to them, snapping photos, while camels lounge in the foreground as if auditioning for postcards. And still, scholars debate their mysteries. How exactly were they built? What deeper meanings might their dimensions hold? Were they aligned with the stars intentionally? Or is that a happy coincidence? Each theory only adds to their allure. So, as you drift off listening to this tale, imagine yourself lying beneath the stars of ancient Egypt, the Great Pyramid towering above you like a mountain shaped by human hands. Picture the flicker of torches, the chanting of priests, the slow creak of wooden sledges hauling stone across the sand. Hear the whispers of myth, the promise of eternity, and the gentle reassurance that even in death, the Egyptians found a way to make life continue. The pyramids, in their silent, stoic way, still tell that story, one stone upon another, reaching patiently toward the heavens. And thus, the age of the pyramids was not merely about stone and sand. It was about belief, the conviction that a king could ascend to the sky, that death was a doorway, and that architecture could be eternal. These colossal structures remain among the greatest expressions of human imagination and devotion. They were, in the end, Egypt's bedtime story to itself, carved into the desert for all eternity. And if you are drifting peacefully into sleep now, well, the pharaohs would no doubt approve. For in the hush of night, under the watchful gaze of pyramids, eternity always seems a little closer. Egypt's story by now is woven tightly with the Nile. That long, life-giving river was no mere body of water. It was the very heartbeat of the land, the thread that stitched together towns, fields, gods and kings. Chapter 5 takes us into the flow of that mighty river, its rhythms, its myths, and its role as the conveyor belt of Egyptian civilization. If the pyramids were stone mountains rooted in eternity, the Nile was the liquid rope that tied life to the desert. Each year, like clockwork, the river swelled with flood waters, bursting its banks and pouring dark silt across the fields. This wasn't seen as a disaster, but as a blessing. Indeed, one of the most predictable and generous blessings in the ancient world. While Mesopotamians wrestled with unpredictable floods and droughts, the Egyptians enjoyed a river that behaved like a polite dinner guest, arriving on time and bringing gifts. Farmers waited eagerly for the inundation, which fertilized their soil and ensured another year of grain. It's not surprising, then, that the Nile became central not only to the economy, but also to religion. The Egyptians personified the river as the god Hapi, a cheerful, pot-bellied figure often depicted with offerings of food. He symbolized abundance, fertility, and the dependable generosity of nature. Hymns were written in his honor, praising him as the bringer of bread and beer. Beer, incidentally, was the everyday drink of the Egyptians, safer than water and considerably more fun, though probably not quite as strong as what you might find in a modern pub. Yet the Nile was not only Hapi's domain, it was also tied to Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. The flooding of the river was likened to Osiris's own resurrection. His body scattered, his life renewed. Just as Osiris was restored by Isis, so too was Egypt restored each year by the waters of the flood. Thus, farming was not merely practical work, but a participation in cosmic cycles. Planting seeds in the mud was, in their eyes, a reenactment of divine myth. The Nile also structured time itself. The Egyptian calendar was divided into 3 seasons: Akhet, the flood; Pere, the growing; and Shemu, the harvest. Everything revolved around this rhythm. Priests in temples observed the stars, particularly Sirius, whose rising heralded the coming flood. This union of astronomy, agriculture, and religion gave Egypt its remarkable stability. People could plan their lives, their rituals, and their taxes with reassuring certainty. Beyond farming, the Nile was a highway. Boats glided up and down its length, carrying goods, soldiers, officials, and gossip. Trade flourished along its banks. Grain, papyrus, gold, and exotic items from Nubia and beyond. Without the Nile's gentle current, Egypt would have been little more than scattered desert villages. With it, they became a nation with arteries of commerce and communication. It was also, rather conveniently, a moat. The desert protected Egypt on either side, but the Nile gave them mobility within. Invaders found it difficult to approach, and Egyptians could concentrate more on building monuments than on defending every border. Some might say geography made them complacent, but others might call it divine providence. Either way, the Nile's role as both shield and lifeline cannot be overstated. The river, of course, wasn't always benevolent. In years when the flood was too low, famine struck, too high, and villages were washed away. These variations reminded Egyptians of the delicate balance of Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order. Pharaohs claimed credit when the floods were good, and they endured mutterings when the waters failed. A king might command armies and build pyramids, but he could not command the river. This gave the Nile a certain quiet authority over even the mightiest rulers. In mythology, the Nile was also linked to journeys of the dead. Tomb paintings often depict boats carrying souls across waters, a parallel to the river that carried life across the desert. The solar bark of Ra, the sun god, sailed through the heavens by day and the underworld by night, echoing the boats that plied the Nile's currents. For Egyptians, the river on earth mirrored the cosmic river above, where gods travelled through eternity. Daily life revolved around its banks. Farmers tilled fields, fishermen cast nets, children splashed in the shallows, and priests carried sacred boats in religious processions. Festivals often involved barks, ornamental boats carrying statues of gods, sailing from one temple to another, as if the divine and the human world shared the same river. Papyrus, that most famous Egyptian invention, grew in abundance along the Nile's marshy edges. From it, they made not only scrolls but also boats, mats, sandals, and baskets. Papyrus scrolls allowed scribes to record everything from grain accounts to hymns, contracts to love poems. Thanks to the Nile's reeds, we now know how Egyptians thought, worked, and dreamed. Crocodiles also lurked in the waters, reminders that the Nile was never entirely tame. Sobek, the crocodile god, was worshipped in certain regions as a symbol of power, fertility, and ferocity. Temples to Sobek housed sacred crocodiles, fed lavishly, and sometimes even mummified upon death. Imagine that, being buried in linen wrappings as a reptilian manifestation of divinity. One can only hope they didn't wake up cranky in the afterlife. The Nile Delta in the north offered a different world altogether. A marshy expanse where channels spread like fingers into the sea. This fertile triangle became a hub for trade and foreign contact. Greeks, Phoenicians, and others sailed into its harbours, mingling with Egyptians and exchanging goods, stories, and ideas. Lower Egypt was Egypt's front porch to the Mediterranean, and the Nile was the welcome mat. In literature and hymns, the river was endlessly praised. One text proclaims, "You have filled the storehouses, you have made the temples flourish, you have caused every craft to prosper." It is no exaggeration to say that Egyptians saw the Nile as the reason for their greatness. Without it, there would be no pharaohs, no pyramids, no civilization at all, just sand and silence. To walk along the Nile's edge in ancient times must have been a calming sight. Farmers guiding ploughs drawn by oxen, women carrying jars of water, boats drifting lazily past, children laughing as they chased each other through the reeds. Above it all, the sun blazed, and the rhythm of life followed the river's steady beat. Even today, modern Egypt leans upon the Nile. The Aswan Dam has changed its flooding patterns, but the river still gives water, power, and life to millions. The continuity is astonishing. 5,000 years and more of dependence upon the same ribbon of blue winding through the desert. So, as you rest, think of the Nile as a lullaby in liquid form. Its floods and flows were the slow heartbeat of Egypt, pulsing with life, myth, and eternity. The people who lived along its banks found in it not only survival but meaning. To them, the river was not just water, but time, death, rebirth, and hope all flowing together. And in its eternal current, the story of Egypt continues still, carrying history gently like a boat on calm waters. By now, dear listener, we have followed Egypt's story from its earliest unification to the mighty pyramids and the life-giving Nile. Yet a civilization is never simply fields and stones. It is also temples and gods, incense and chanting, ritual and myth. Chapter 6 is devoted to the great Egyptian temples, those vast complexes where heaven and earth met, and where humans tried, sometimes rather noisily, to keep the gods content. If pyramids were houses of eternity, then temples were houses of the living gods, bustling with activity, full of smoke, song, and the occasional procession that must have looked like a particularly extravagant parade. Temples were not churches in the modern sense. Ordinary people did not gather inside for weekly sermons. Rather, temples were cosmic engines where the pharaoh and the priesthood worked tirelessly to maintain Ma'at, the balance of the universe. Each temple was dedicated to a specific deity: Ra at Heliopolis, Amun at Karnak, Horus at Edfu, Hathor at Dendera. These were no modest chapels either. They sprawled across acres, their pylons and courtyards adorned with colossal statues and walls carved with hieroglyphs. To walk through one was to wander into the script of a giant stone book, where every surface whispered myths of gods, victories of kings, and offerings of eternal gratitude. At the heart of each temple was the sanctuary, a small, dimly lit room housing the god's cult statue. The Egyptians believed that the god's spirit resided within this image, which was carefully tended by priests each day. They bathed it, clothed it, anointed it with oils, and even offered meals: bread, beer, meat, fruit, all laid out before a deity who, one imagines, never worried about calories. After the offerings were ritually consumed, they were distributed among the priests, which seems a very practical arrangement if you ask me. The daily rituals were highly structured. At dawn, the priests would awaken the god with hymns and incense. They opened the shrine doors as if drawing curtains to let the divine sunlight in. The statue was then cleansed and dressed in fine linen, jewellery, and crowns. Imagine a celestial version of morning grooming, except with considerably more perfume. Throughout the day, further rituals reinforced the bond between deity and devotees, and at night the god was ceremonially put to bed. It was, in essence, the divine equivalent of a very attentive butler service. Temples were also centres of economic power. They owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of workers, and controlled industries such as farming, brewing, and textile production. Offerings to the gods translated into real resources, making the priesthood both wealthy and influential. Sometimes their power rivaled that of the pharaoh himself, which led to inevitable tensions. A ruler might command armies, but he needed the cooperation of priests to ensure the god smiled upon him. To annoy the priesthood was quite literally to risk cosmic disorder. Mythology infused every temple. At Karnak, the temple of Amun was aligned with the rising sun, symbolizing creation and renewal. At Dendera, the ceiling of the temple of Hathor bore a painted map of the stars, reminding worshippers that their rituals echoed the movements of the heavens. At Edfu, great reliefs depicted Horus defeating Set, an eternal reassurance that order triumphed over chaos. To walk through such spaces was to step into myth-made stone, every wall a stage for cosmic drama. Festivals brought these myths vividly to life. Once a year, during the festival of Opet at Thebes, the statue of Amun was carried in procession from Karnak to Luxor. Crowds gathered, music played, beer flowed, and the god went on holiday down the Nile in a splendid boat. Ordinary Egyptians, who rarely saw the hidden statues, suddenly glimpsed their deity paraded in splendour. It was both religious devotion and community carnival rolled into one. The atmosphere must have been electric, and perhaps a little tipsy given the quantities of beer involved. Not all temples were grandiose. Local shrines dotted villages, dedicated to protective deities and household gods. People prayed to Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, or Bes, a squat lion-faced spirit who warded off evil and liked to dance. These smaller cults gave religion an intimate domestic feel. For all the grandeur of Karnak and Luxor, most Egyptians found comfort in the cheerful grin of Bes carved onto amulets hanging over their beds. Yet the great temples also endured for millennia, and with them the stories of gods. Some were renovated and expanded endlessly, each pharaoh eager to add his own pylon, obelisk, or hall of columns. Karnak in particular became a kind of architectural diary, growing from a modest shrine into the largest religious complex in the world. Standing among its towering columns today, one feels dwarfed not only by stone, but by centuries of devotion. One cannot help but admire the artistry. Hieroglyphic inscriptions detail offerings, victories, and prayers in a script both beautiful and mysterious. Walls glow with images of gods striding, smiting, blessing, and embracing kings. Colours once vivid have faded with time, yet traces of red, blue, and gold still cling to the carvings, hinting at a splendour that must have dazzled the eye. These temples were not grey ruins, but kaleidoscopes of colour, vibrant stages for the eternal theatre of the gods. Of course, even gods' houses are not immune to history. In later centuries, many temples were defaced by invading armies, repurposed by new religions, or left to crumble beneath drifting sand. Some were dismantled stone by stone for building materials. Others, like Abu Simbel, were rescued in modern times from the rising waters of Lake Nasser and painstakingly reassembled on higher ground. Their survival is a testament to both their grandeur and our enduring fascination with them. There is a curious irony here. Temples were built as eternal homes for gods, yet they depended on human hands to endure. Without priests to tend them, gods fell silent. Without communities to repair them, walls collapsed, and yet, though their rituals ceased thousands of years ago, these temples still whisper of eternity. Tourists wander through their ruins, reading plaques instead of prayers, yet the aura of divinity remains. In myth, the gods themselves often visited temples. Ra was believed to rest in his shrine at Heliopolis after his daily journey. Osiris's remains were scattered across Egypt, but temples claimed fragments of his body as relics, turning the land itself into a divine anatomy. At Philae, Isis was venerated as Queen of Magic, her cult lasting well into the Roman era, long after the old religion had faded elsewhere. These temples were not only stone, they were living mythologies, breathing through ritual. So, what did ordinary Egyptians think as they gazed at towering pylons and colossal statues? Likely awe, perhaps pride, and certainly a sense of cosmic security. For them, the temple was proof that Ma'at prevailed, that the gods were close, that the pharaoh cared for both heaven and earth. Even if daily life was hard, ploughing fields, grinding grain, paying taxes, one could look to the gleaming temple walls and believe the universe itself was in balance. Temples, then, were not just architecture. They were philosophy in stone. They declared that the divine and the human were partners, that order could be maintained, that life had meaning. And as our gentle journey through Egypt continues, one cannot help but smile at the thought that these vast, solemn monuments were also places where priests bustled about, statues were tucked into beds, and festivals occasionally descended into merry chaos. If you are drifting off now, imagine the faint scent of incense, the murmur of chants echoing off vast columns, and the gentle splash of oars carrying a god down the Nile at festival time. In that quiet half-dream, you may just glimpse the divine order the Egyptians sought so tirelessly to preserve. And if not, well, At least you'll have had a good bedtime story out of it. The Egyptian pantheon was as intricate as a fine tapestry, populated by deities both formidable and whimsical. At the top was Ra, the sun god, who sailed across the sky each day in his solar bark, illuminating the world and vanquishing darkness. Every morning, Ra's journey was a cosmic reset, reminding mortals that order could triumph over chaos, even if the floodplains were sometimes sticky with mud and rebellious cats. Ra was joined by Osiris, lord of the underworld, a symbol of death and resurrection. Isis, the devoted sister and wife, whose magical prowess rivaled that of any modern superhero. Horus, the falcon-headed protector. And Set, the god of chaos, storms, and all things inconvenient, like spilled beer and missing sandals. Each god had a story, a myth that explained the world and its workings. The myth of Osiris, for instance, reads like a drama worthy of 1,000 sequels. Osiris ruled Egypt with wisdom until his brother Set, envious and spiteful, tricked him into a coffin and cast him into the Nile. Isis, grieving and determined, scoured the land, found his body, and with her magic restored him to life, though in the underworld rather than on earth. Their son Horus then avenged his father, battling Set in a series of contests that established order and kingship. This myth explained more than family drama. It encoded principles of kingship, the afterlife, and moral justice. Magic, or Heka, was not merely superstition. It was a vital, practical force. Priests, magicians, and even household members wielded spells for protection, healing, and success. Amulets, charms, and incantations were ubiquitous. One could find the Eye of Horus, symbolizing protection and restoration, in tombs and homes alike. A mother might whisper spells over her child, while a scribe could employ magical formulas to secure victory in a court case. Heka was the connective tissue between human action and divine will, a tool of influence in a world governed by Ma'at, the cosmic order. Magic intertwined with religion, particularly in funerary practices. The Book of the Dead, a compilation of spells and instructions, guided the deceased through the afterlife, ensuring safe passage past demons, crocodiles, and other supernatural hazards. One spell advises the soul to recite the correct names of gods and monsters. Another instructs it to not be taken by hunger or thirst, which is comforting but also rather literal-minded. In essence, magic was the bridge between the mortal and the divine, the ritualized expression of humanity's hope that order could prevail over uncertainty. The gods were present everywhere, in the sun, the sky, the earth, and the Nile. Animals often embodied their power. The ibis represented Thoth, god of wisdom, the lioness, Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing, and the cat, sacred to Bastet, protector of home and hearth. Egyptians did not merely revere these animals. They observed them, nurtured them, and sometimes mummified them, ensuring that the divine spark in nature endured beyond death. A temple cat might seem lazy today, but in its heyday, it was a sacred creature, patrolling the corridors of divine presence. Festivals brought myth to life. The said festival, celebrated every few decades for a pharaoh, rejuvenated kingship itself. The pharaoh would run, perform rituals, and symbolically renew his strength before the gods. Likewise, during the Feast of Koyak, Osiris's death and resurrection were enacted, reaffirming the eternal cycle of life and death. These festivals combined ritual, theatre, and community, ensuring that myths remained active and visible. The gods were not distant abstractions, they were participants in the rhythms of everyday life. Even the ordinary Egyptian could engage with divine stories. Children grew up hearing tales of cunning Set, heroic Horus, and wise Thoth. Farmers might offer libations to Hapi, the Nile god, before planting. Craftsmen invoked Ptah, god of creation, before beginning their work. Everyday life, work, and play were all infused with divine significance, subtly reinforcing a worldview in which the universe had order and humans had purpose. Priesthoods mediated this complex web. Temples employed scribes, musicians, dancers, and ritual specialists, each with precise roles. The hierarchy was rigid, yet every function was vital. Priests performed sacred rites. Scribes documented offerings. Musicians accompanied rituals. And dancers enacted stories of gods and cosmic battles. Together they ensured that both heaven and earth remained in balance, that Ra rose each day, and that the underworld did not overflow into mortal affairs. Magic, myth, and temples also intersected with politics. Pharaohs were divine representatives, often portrayed as Horus incarnate. Their legitimacy derived from adherence to Ma'at and their patronage of temples. A ruler who neglected religious duties risked more than political unrest. He risked cosmic imbalance. For Egyptians, the success of the state and the stability of the universe were inseparable. Building monuments, offering rituals, and funding temples were not vanity projects. They were the practical administration of cosmic order. The myths themselves are rife with symbolic resonance. The tale of Isis and Osiris reflects cycles of death and rebirth. Horus's victory over Set represents the triumph of order over chaos. The daily journey of Ra mirrors the passage of time, the inevitability of night and day, life and death. These stories were not merely entertaining. They were frameworks for understanding existence, encoded into art, ritual, and architecture. They shaped morality, governance, and culture for millennia. Consider also the afterlife, intimately tied to myth. Tombs, coffins, and funerary texts ensured that the deceased could traverse the duat, the underworld, safely. Souls were judged before Osiris, with hearts weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Success meant eternal life among the stars. Failure, annihilation or consumption by the devouring goddess Amit. Life on earth was thus inseparable from preparation for eternity, a reality both solemn and reassuring. If you obeyed the rules, the cosmos rewarded you. Magic and myth extended into medicine, craft, and astronomy. The Egyptians used amulets to treat illness, prayers to protect crops, and star charts to predict the Nile's inundation. Gods were present in every sphere, from the mundane to the cosmic. In this way, religion, myth, and daily life blended seamlessly, each reinforcing the other. Magic, far from fanciful, was practical. Myth, far from abstract, was instructive. And so, as you drift into a half-conscious reverie, imagine the hum of temple chants, the flicker of torchlight, the whispered incantations of priests, and the imagined footsteps of gods walking among mortals. Picture Ra's solar bark gliding across the sky, Isis searching for her lost Osiris, Horus poised to strike Set. Envision spells protecting farmers in the field, amulets guarding children at home, and temples anchoring cosmic balance in stone and ritual. This is Egypt's hidden world, rich, layered, and profoundly human, despite the presence of gods. Magic and myth were not merely beliefs. They were the lenses through which Egyptians understood life, death, and the universe itself. They gave meaning to work, to festivals, to love, and to loss. they structured morality, politics, and personal piety. They allowed humans to interact with gods, to negotiate with destiny, and to find reassurance amid uncertainty. In short, they made sense of a world both magnificent and precarious. So, dear listener, as the sun sets over your imagination, let these stories settle gently in your mind. Let Ra's warmth, Isis's devotion, Horus's vigilance, and the hum of ancient chants lull you into contemplation. For in the dance of gods, magic, and myth, we glimpse not only the soul of Egypt, but also the timeless human desire to understand, to order, and to endure. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will dream of a world where divine and mortal, magic and matter, myth and history all flow together like the eternal Nile itself. Chapter 8 invites us to consider the very heart of ancient Egypt, the pharaohs. Not merely rulers, they were living symbols of divine authority, custodians of Ma'at, and actors in the timeless drama of gods, mortals, and cosmic order. Imagine, if you will, a man, or occasionally a woman, standing atop a palace, crown gleaming in the sun, eyes fixed on the Nile, knowing that the welfare of millions and the favour of the gods rest upon their shoulders. A weight heavier than any pyramid stone, yet carried with poise, ritual, and occasionally a rather dramatic flourish. The word pharaoh itself derives from per-aa, meaning great house, an evocative reminder that the ruler and the palace were inseparable. Early kings like Narmer or Menes, around 3100 BCE, unified Upper and Lower Egypt, establishing a template of kingship intertwined with both political authority and divine symbolism. Narmer's ceremonial palette depicts him triumphing over enemies, emphasizing that the pharaoh's role was both martial and sacred, a protector of order against the forces of chaos, much like Horus himself. From this point forward, every pharaoh was expected to act in accordance with Ma'at, ensuring justice, balance, and harmony across both the mortal and spiritual realms. Failing in this sacred duty was more than a political misstep. It was believed to disrupt the cosmos itself. Pharaohs embodied the duality of human and divine. In life, they were Horus incarnate. In death, they became Osiris, god of the underworld. Their rule was not merely political, but cosmic, a delicate interplay between earthly governance and divine service. Military campaigns, temple constructions, and public ceremonies were therefore acts of both administration and religious devotion. A pharaoh might marshal armies to protect borders, commission monuments to honour the gods, or ensure that the Nile's inundation proceeded smoothly through ritual, each action a thread in the vast tapestry of cosmic balance. Tombs and funerary practices further reflected the divine role of kingship. During the Old Kingdom, pyramids symbolized eternal ascent, monumental expressions of authority, and sacred continuity. Later, in the New Kingdom, pharaohs sought concealment in the Valley of the Kings, commissioning tombs adorned with murals depicting both earthly life and the afterlife, complete with excerpts from the Book of the Dead. These tombs ensured that kingship persisted beyond mortal life, reinforcing the idea that the pharaoh's authority extended into eternity. One can almost imagine the meticulous artisans, carefully painting each scene, whispering prayers to the gods as they worked, aware that they were shaping not merely art, but eternity itself. Yet kingship was not exercised in isolation. Egypt's bureaucracy was astonishingly sophisticated. Viziers, scribes, and officials oversaw taxation, trade, labour, and legal matters, ensuring that the daily workings of the kingdom flowed smoothly. The pharaoh was the source of authority, but it was these administrators who implemented it. Viziers, often described as the right hand of the king, supervised everything from grain distribution to temple offerings, ensuring that Ma'at prevailed in both law and life. Occasionally, one suspects, they also whispered reminders to the pharaoh not to misplace his ceremonial crook. Symbolism and art reinforced royal authority. Pharaohs were depicted in stylized poses. Left foot forward, double crown atop their heads, crook and flail in hand, each element communicating power, protection, and divine favour. Sculpture and reliefs immortalised their strength and godly nature, sending a clear message to citizens and visitors alike. Egypt thrived under the gaze of a god-king. Even the smallest hieroglyph was carefully chosen to convey authority, legitimacy, and continuity. Every statue, every inscription, every temple pylon was an eloquent sermon in stone. Humanity, however, persisted even in the divine. Pharaohs were ambitious, fallible, and occasionally prone to eccentricity. Akhenaten, for instance, dramatically shifted the religious landscape by elevating Aten, the sun disk, above the traditional pantheon. His reforms disrupted the established priesthood and temple economy, provoking both admiration and controversy. Tutankhamun, though less politically significant, achieved immortality through the opulence of his tomb and the story of its discovery. Rameses II, in contrast, used both longevity and ambition to leave a legacy of colossal monuments, asserting his power in stone for millennia to come. The stories of these rulers illustrate that human personality, circumstance, and decision-making intertwined with divine expectation, often producing outcomes both remarkable and unexpected. Royal women also shaped the course of history. Hatshepsut boldly assumed the title of pharaoh, commissioning temples and expeditions that rivaled her male predecessors. Cleopatra VII, centuries later, navigated alliances with Rome, demonstrating that charisma, intelligence, and strategic acumen could influence empires. Queens were symbols of continuity and divine legitimacy, their presence reinforcing the pharaoh's authority and connection to the gods. The interplay of male and female power in Egyptian royalty was both pragmatic and symbolic, illustrating the complexities of governance, succession, and divine favour. Mythology was inseparable from rulership. Pharaohs were Horus in life, Osiris in death, and their actions often mirrored mythic narratives. Ceremonial rituals such as the Hebsed festival rejuvenated the king's strength and reinforced cosmic order. These rituals combined choreography, symbolism, and public spectacle, reminding citizens that the pharaoh's authority was both sacred and practical. Even seemingly mundane acts, ploughing fields, distributing grain, or participating in temple ceremonies, were imbued with spiritual significance. The ordinary and the divine were inseparable in Egyptian consciousness, and the pharaoh was the living bridge between the two. Daily life at the palace and court also reflected divine symbolism. Meals, clothing, and adornments conveyed authority and protection. Gold, lapis lazuli, and precious stones were not merely decorative but emblematic of divine radiance. Regalia, amulets, and ceremonial garb projected power, warded off misfortune, and aligned the king with cosmic forces. Each act, whether administrative, martial, or ceremonial, reinforced the pharaoh's position as guardian of Ma'at, mediator of the gods, and leader of the people. One can imagine a pharaoh adjusting his headdress, checking the placement of a crook, and silently praying that the gods approve. An image at once human and divine. Foreign relations further tested the pharaoh's skill. Diplomacy with Nubia, Kush, the Hittites, and later Mediterranean powers required negotiation, tribute, and sometimes military action. Ramses II famously negotiated one of history's earliest known peace treaties following the Battle of Kadesh, demonstrating that kingship involved both sword and ink. Trade missions brought exotic goods, gold, ivory, incense, cedar, and animals, enhancing wealth and cultural influence. Even diplomacy was a performance. Gifts, ceremonies, and alliances were designed to impress, placate, and ensure Egypt's continued prosperity. Education of royal heirs ensured the continuity of kingship. Young princes were trained in administration, military strategy, ritual, literacy, and moral responsibility. They learned to embody the ideals of Horus and Ma'at, balancing authority with wisdom. Mistakes could be costly, both politically and spiritually. One can almost picture a young prince fumbling with ceremonial attire, nervously reciting prayers, while a tutor sighs in quiet exasperation, a reminder that even the most divine of kings had to start somewhere. Art, literature, and inscriptions preserved the memory of pharaohs for eternity. Tombs depicted victories, divine favour, and daily life. Poems and hymns celebrated devotion, achievement, and legacy. Monuments ensured that kingship, mythology, and history remained intertwined across generations. Even minor rulers achieved a kind of immortality through these carefully crafted records. Through these enduring traces, pharaohs spoke to posterity, their voices echoing through stone, papyrus, and legend. Consider finally the duality of the pharaoh. Human yet divine, political yet cosmic, commanding armies yet reliant on the Nile, priests and artisans. They were the linchpins of Egyptian society, sustaining not only political authority, but the very fabric of cosmic and social order. In their lives, one sees the interplay of ambition, devotion, skill, and circumstance, demonstrating the remarkable complexity of Egyptian kingship. As sleep gently approaches, picture a pharaoh atop his palace, gazing across the Nile, temples and monuments sprawling in every direction. Hear the distant murmur of priests, the rhythmic splash of the river, and the muted chorus of citizens offering devotion and labour. In this serene vision, the grandeur of kingship and the rhythms of daily life converge in a harmony both timeless and calming. Pharaohs were more than rulers. They were bridges between mortal and divine, custodians of Ma'at, and enduring symbols of Egypt's creativity, devotion, and power. Through their lives, deaths, and legacies, we glimpse the intricate interplay of authority, ritual, and myth. A civilization where human effort and divine favour were inseparably entwined. Sleep now, and allow the vision of pharaohs, temples, and the eternal Nile to carry you gently into dreams, where history and legend flow as seamlessly as the river itself. At the heart of daily existence was the Nile, more than just a river. It dictated seasons, inspired worship, and nourished the land. Each year, its waters rose in the annual inundation, depositing fertile silt upon the floodplains. Farmers depended on this predictable, though sometimes unpredictable cycle. Its generosity was considered sacred, overseen by Hapi, the god of the Nile, whose blessings were invoked through both grand temple rituals and small personal prayers. Observations of the stars, particularly the heliacal rising of Sirius, guided planting and harvesting, blending practical knowledge with celestial observation. One can imagine farmers coaxing oxen to plough soaked fields, quietly singing to maintain rhythm, all while hoping that Happy would ensure a bountiful harvest. In Egypt, practical skill and spiritual devotion were inseparable, entwined like reeds along the riverbank. Agriculture was essential not just for survival, but as the foundation of the economy. Wheat and barley provided staples for bread and beer, flax for linen, and vegetables and fruits such as figs, dates and grapes supplemented daily nutrition. Farmers relied on a combination of tools, from ploughs and sickles to sophisticated irrigation canals, demonstrating remarkable technical skill. Planting and harvest were accompanied by rituals to honour the gods, emphasising that even mundane work held spiritual significance. Workers sang, joked, and sometimes grumbled, but all understood that their labour connected humanity with the divine and upheld Ma'at, the cosmic order. Artisans were equally vital to Egyptian society. Stone carvers, metal workers, potters, weavers, and jewellers transformed raw materials into both functional and sacred objects. Temples and tombs were adorned with their creations, from statues of gods to delicate amulets protecting the living and the dead. These works were not merely decorative, they were vessels of spiritual power, carefully crafted to honour the gods and ensure continuity in both life and afterlife. One can picture a sculptor chiselling Osiris with painstaking precision, murmuring prayers, fully aware that each stroke connected the mortal realm with divine eternity. Scribes held a privileged place in society. Literate and skilled in hieroglyphs, hieratic, and later demotic script, they recorded taxes, legal decrees, trade, and religious texts. Their work preserved knowledge across generations and maintained social and spiritual order. Young apprentices spent years learning the art of writing, aware that one misdrawn symbol could confuse administration, or, worse, spiritual instruction. The role of a scribe shows that intellect and dedication could confer influence, and in a sense, immortality through recorded word. Daily life for ordinary Egyptians revolved around family, work, and devotion. Homes were both domestic and sacred spaces, often adorned with small shrines and protective amulets. Families engaged in daily prayers, offerings, and rituals to ensure divine favour and household well-being. Communities thrived on cooperation, shared labour, and celebration. Markets were lively hubs of commerce and social interaction, where merchants invoked Thoth or Bes for success, while trading grain, jewellery, or exotic goods. These markets were as much spiritual centres as commercial ones, illustrating the seamless intertwining of daily life and divine oversight. Soldiers were indispensable for maintaining security and projecting the pharaoh's authority. Trained in archery, chariot warfare, and hand-to-hand combat, they defended Egypt's borders, protected trade routes, and ensured internal stability. Military service offered social benefits, including land grants and elevated status, and soldiers often carried protective amulets and recited prayers for divine favour. Their presence illustrates how practical skill and spiritual devotion coexisted. Defence was as much a matter of human effort as of divine blessing. Religion permeated all aspects of daily life. Household gods such as Bes, protector of homes and families, and Taweret, guardian of childbirth, were central to domestic rituals. Daily offerings, prayers, and protective spells were routine, embedding spiritual consciousness into everyday activities. Funerary practices for ordinary Egyptians were detailed and careful. Even modest tombs contained painted scenes of daily work and inscriptions from the Book of the Dead, guiding the deceased through the afterlife. Life, death, and eternity were viewed as a continuum, and human actions were inseparably linked to cosmic balance. Education, although primarily accessible to scribes and elites, preserved culture and social order. Children learned reading, writing, arithmetic, religious instruction, and practical skills. Moral and spiritual education prepared the young to navigate society while honouring the gods. Those diligent and talented enough could rise to prominence, showing that effort and intellect could complement birth and status. Instruction created continuity, ensuring Egypt's civilization remained cohesive across generations. Trade connected Egypt to distant lands, introducing wealth, luxury goods, and new ideas. Merchants travelled to Nubia, Punt, the Levant, and Mediterranean ports, transporting gold, ivory, cedar, incense, and exotic animals. Trade was not merely economic, it was ceremonial. Offerings and prayers accompanied voyages to ensure divine protection. Markets were vibrant, combining practical negotiation, ritual observance, and storytelling, a reminder that commerce and devotion were deeply intertwined. Family life balanced duty and affection. Patriarchal but flexible, households relied on cooperation and shared responsibilities. Women could own property, manage estates, and participate in temple service. Children were educated in practical, moral, and spiritual skills to ensure cultural continuity. Domestic routines reflected societal values. Labour, devotion, education, and recreation were integrated, reinforcing family, community, and divine harmony. Medicine in ancient Egypt combined practical observation with spiritual practice. Physicians treated illness with herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and magical incantations. Disease was considered both physical and spiritual. Amulets, prayers, and rituals complemented treatment. This holistic approach reflects sophisticated understanding, linking body, mind, and divine oversight. Even simple remedies, paired with ritual, demonstrated that every act could hold spiritual significance. Festivals punctuated the year with music, dance, and communal participation. Opet, Wag, and Koyak blended myth, ritual, and social celebration. Gods were paraded, myths reenacted, and communities united in devotion. Festivals reinforced social identity and spiritual alignment, reminding Egyptians that human life and divine order were intertwined. Their rhythm maintained the cultural heartbeat of civilization. Art, literature, and craftsmanship preserved the experiences of ordinary Egyptians. Tomb paintings depicted farming, hunting, family life, and worship. Songs, fables, and instructional texts conveyed moral and practical lessons. Objects such as pottery, jewellery, and amulets were functional yet symbolic, connecting the material with the spiritual. Through these works, ordinary Egyptians left enduring legacies, proving that culture relied as much on daily life as on monumental architecture. Even small details reveal the vibrancy of Egyptian society. Children played with miniature boats and dolls, music accompanied work and worship, and homes were adorned with protective charms. Every act, from farming to prayer, was infused with meaning. Each person's contribution, however modest, supported societal stability and cultural continuity. Considering the lives of ordinary Egyptians, it becomes evident that they were indispensable to the grandeur of the civilization. Farmers fed the nation. Artisans created lasting cultural works. Scribes recorded knowledge. Priests maintained religious continuity. Soldiers defended the land. And merchants facilitated trade. Their collective efforts ensured temples stood, granaries were full, and traditions persisted. Civilization depended as much on their quiet diligence as on the feats of rulers. Imagine the Nile at dusk, farmers guiding oxen through flooded fields, artisans shaping stone and metal, scribes carefully transcribing texts, soldiers patrolling borders, and children running along dusty streets, laughter mingling with the river's gentle hum. Festivals brought music, processions, and devotion to towns, while prayers and charms protected homes. Egypt emerges as a living civilization, sustained by ordinary people whose labour, creativity, and devotion created society's enduring rhythm. As sleep draws near, reflect on these lives. Tireless, inventive, devoted, and deeply human. History is not only the tale of kings or gods, but of countless ordinary lives interwoven to sustain culture, memory, and belief. Through their rhythms of work, worship, and celebration, we glimpse the essence of Egypt, a civilization where human effort and divine order flowed together like the eternal waters of the Nile. Thus, ordinary Egyptians emerge not as mere background figures, but as central actors in a civilization whose influence spans millennia. Their stories remind us that history's true grandeur often lies in the quiet, persistent, and devoted actions of everyday people, whose echoes resonate through temples, tombs, texts, and the very rhythm of the river. Sleep, then, with the gentle flow of the Nile and the hum of Egyptian life in mind, where the mundane and the divine meet in harmonious balance. Consider first the concept of Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, order, and cosmic harmony. Ma'at underpinned not only governance but daily life, weaving together the spiritual, social, and natural order. Pharaohs were expected to uphold Ma'at, but ordinary Egyptians contributed too. Farmers tending their fields, artisans crafting sacred objects, and scribes recording truthfully all ensured the stability of society. The principle is remarkable for its universality. It reminds us that civilizations endure not solely through monumental architecture or conquest, but through adherence to values that promote order, fairness, and respect. One might even say that the Egyptians were, in their own way, early philosophers of cosmic management, perhaps with slightly better hats. Religion permeated every facet of life, and its richness shaped both public and private spheres. The pantheon of gods, vast and complex, guided everything from the flooding of the Nile to the success of a harvest. Osiris, god of the afterlife, symbolized resurrection and justice. Isis, embodying magic and motherhood, offered protection. Ra, the sun god, traversed the sky daily in his solar bark, reminding Egyptians of life's cyclical nature. Myth and ritual were practical as well as spiritual, providing frameworks for understanding the world and navigating uncertainties. Festivals, temple ceremonies, and daily offerings kept these stories alive, connecting every individual with cosmic narratives. Imagine, if you will, a humble farmer offering a small loaf of bread to Ra at dawn, perhaps the most understated yet profound cosmic transaction in history. Egyptian innovation extended far beyond theology. The development of hieroglyphic writing enabled not only administrative control, but the preservation of literature, science, and culture. Scribes meticulously recorded everything from census data to magical incantations, ensuring knowledge transcended generations. The Egyptians excelled in mathematics, engineering, and astronomy. Their architectural marvels, pyramids, obelisks, and temples, demonstrate precision, understanding of geometry, and sophisticated planning. Roads, canals, and irrigation systems reveal a society attuned to both practicality and sustainability. In essence, Egyptian ingenuity combined imagination, observation, and meticulous planning, a blend that allowed a civilization to flourish for millennia, long before anyone had even heard of modern project management. The Egyptian approach to life, death, and the afterlife is a lesson in holistic perspective. Mortality was not feared, but understood as a transition, and the afterlife was a continuation of earthly existence, provided one lived in accordance with Ma'at and performed necessary rituals. Tombs, whether humble or monumental, contained objects to sustain life beyond death. Food, tools, amulets, and texts like the Book of the Dead. Even in death, Egyptians sought harmony, preparation, and connection to the divine. The precision with which they prepared burial chambers, from elaborate coffins to wall inscriptions, underscores their belief in continuity, demonstrating that attention to detail was not merely aesthetic, but deeply spiritual. Art, architecture, and daily artifacts reveal a civilization that valued beauty, symbolism, and meaning. Paintings and carvings depicted gods, kings, and daily life, blending functionality with storytelling. Jewelry, pottery, and amulets were practical yet symbolic, reinforcing protection, social status, or spiritual devotion. Every object, every stroke of pigment, every inscribed symbol was a testament to the integration of human creativity, religious practice, and societal structure. Even ordinary Egyptians, through these acts, participated in the perpetuation of culture. Consider the delicate amulet of Bes, intended to ward off misfortune, both a tiny talisman and a small piece of history that survived millennia. Egyptian society, as we have explored, was a delicate balance of hierarchy, skill, and communal responsibility. Pharaohs wielded immense power, but the contributions of scribes, artisans, priests, soldiers, merchants, and farmers were indispensable. Each person played a role in sustaining Ma'at, preserving knowledge, and ensuring cultural continuity. Social mobility, though limited, was possible for those with talent, particularly scribes and skilled artisans. The integration of practical labour, ritual observance, and community cooperation created a resilient, adaptive society. One might imagine it as a well-rehearsed orchestra. The pharaoh conducts, the priests provide harmonies, and the citizens perform the daily music that sustains civilization. Trade and diplomacy expanded Egypt's influence, connecting it to Africa, the Levant, and the Mediterranean. Merchants carried gold, cedar, ivory, and exotic animals across deserts and seas, facilitating both material prosperity and cultural exchange. Diplomatic marriages, treaties, and ceremonial exchanges strengthened political alliances. Trade was deeply embedded in both economy and religion. Offerings and prayers accompanied departures and returns, reminding all participants that human action and divine favour were inseparable. Egyptian connectivity is a testament to how commerce, culture, and spirituality were harmoniously interwoven. Education, literacy, and intellectual life contributed to the civilization's longevity. The training of scribes, the instruction of priests, and the passing down of crafts and rituals created continuity. Knowledge was respected, recorded, and transmitted, demonstrating an early understanding of the importance of intellectual infrastructure. Children, particularly boys from literate families, were educated in reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious practice, preparing them to uphold social, religious, and administrative functions. Education was both a privilege and a responsibility, reflecting a society that valued preparation, order, and continuity. The rhythm of daily life, though shaped by work, ritual, and duty, also included joy, creativity, and leisure. Children played with dolls, miniature boats, and animal figurines. Music accompanied work, festivals, and temple ceremonies. Storytelling and humour enlivened communal gatherings. Egyptians understood that life required balance, blending labour with celebration, devotion with recreation, and practical effort with aesthetic expression. This holistic approach ensured that the culture was vibrant, adaptable, and memorable. Medicine and science reveal another aspect of Egyptian brilliance. Physicians combined empirical observation with spiritual practice. Herbal remedies, surgical interventions, and incantations were all employed to treat illness. Diseases were understood as both physical and spiritual, and treatment addressed both dimensions. The attention to hygiene, diet, and medical preparation underscores a sophisticated understanding of health. Even the simplest acts, drinking clean water, preparing herbal poultices, or reciting protective spells, demonstrate a society attuned to the interconnection of body, mind, and divine favour. As we consider the totality of Egyptian civilization, one cannot overlook its profound influence on later cultures. Greek, Roman, and even modern Western civilization drew inspiration from Egyptian mathematics, architecture, medicine, and philosophy. The fascination with pyramids, mummies, and hieroglyphs is not mere novelty. It reflects recognition of enduring innovation, discipline, and symbolic imagination. In this sense, Egypt's legacy is both historical and cultural, extending beyond its temporal boundaries into the consciousness of the world. Finally, reflecting upon the people themselves, the farmers, artisans, scribes, soldiers, priests, and merchants, reminds us that history is not just the tale of kings or gods, but of ordinary lives intertwined in sustaining a civilization. Their daily efforts, whether in fields, workshops, homes, or temples, created the conditions for extraordinary achievements. Without them, pyramids would remain empty stone, temples mere architectural shells, and gods unhonoured. The quiet persistence, devotion, and creativity of ordinary Egyptians ensured the durability of culture, the continuity of faith, and the survival of knowledge. Imagine the Nile at dawn one last time, the fields glistening under the early sun, farmers guiding oxen, artisans at their workshops, scribes recording the day's events, soldiers preparing for duty, children laughing and playing. Temples echo with chants, small household shrines glow with offerings, and festivals bring music and laughter to towns. Egypt lived in its people, in the rhythm of work and worship, in the harmony of social, spiritual, and practical life. The civilization's grandeur was not only in its monumental structures, but in the delicate, persistent, and devoted contributions of its people. Sleep with this image in mind, and allow it to carry you through the night. A society where human endeavour, divine presence, cultural innovation, and daily life coexisted in balance. Egypt reminds us that civilization is as much about the people who sustain it quietly as the rulers who claim its glory. Every act, however small, contributes to the continuity of culture, memory and belief. The Nile flows on, unbroken, as does the legacy of a people whose lives, thoughts and devotion continue to inspire and captivate us. Imagine a land of sun-drenched stone and shimmering river reeds, where the great Nile slices through the desert like a living god, where gold glints beneath linen veils and the scent of blue lotus drifts through towering palace halls. You are in ancient Egypt, not as a faceless peasant, nor even as one of the ever-bickering scribes. Number today, your fate is sealed with coal-lined eyes and a crown of lapis lazuli. You are to become great royal wife, Queen of Egypt, consort to the living god upon the throne. It is, as they say, an honour. Though whether you will still feel so honoured by the end of your days is another matter entirely. From the moment the high priest's messenger arrived at your family villa with trembling voice and sealed papyrus scroll, your life has been spinning faster than the potter's wheel. Your father, a nobleman of the court, one of the few who might have hoped for such a match, nearly choked on his pomegranate wine. Your mother wept tears that seemed part pride, part dread. You yourself? You smiled, because that is what one does. Inside, a strange knot began to twist beneath your ribs, a knot that even the finest perfumed oils cannot soothe. And so here you are, carried aloft upon a gilded litter borne by 6 of the pharaoh's finest soldiers, your linen robes trailing like a river of light behind you. The streets of Thebes swarm with onlookers, their voices rising in a wave of acclamation. Or is it curiosity? They shout your name, though many do not know your face. They know only that today a new queen will be crowned. And perhaps, privately, they know too that such queens do not always remain queens for long. The great temple of Karnak looms ahead, colossal columns thick as cedar trunks, each etched with the exploits of kings long dust. The air hums with incense and anticipation. As your litter is lowered before the towering gates, you feel the first flutter of real fear. Once you pass through, there is no turning back. You are met by the high priest, an ancient figure so gaunt he seems to have been carved by the same artisans who built these walls. His smile is thin as papyrus. "Come, daughter of Egypt," he intones, voice echoing through the stone. It is time. You follow him beneath the massive lintels, feet bare upon cool alabaster tiles. Ahead, the inner sanctuary shimmers with lamplight. Statues of Isis and Hathor gaze down upon you, serene and pitiless. Here, the rites of queenship will bind you to the throne, and to all that comes with it. The coronation ritual is long, deliberate, and thick with meaning. You are washed in sacred water, drawn from the Nile at dawn. You are anointed with oils, whose recipes are known only to the temple's innermost circle. Oils meant to confer not just physical beauty, but spiritual protection. Your eyelids are darkened with kohl to ward off the evil eye. Your lips stained with red ochre, symbol of life. You are clad in robes of finest linen, embroidered with the royal uraeus, the rearing cobra that marks divine authority. It is a serpent that offers no comfort. And then, the moment, the great crown of the queen is brought forth, gleaming with gold and semi-precious stones. The high priest lifts it high above your bowed head, his voice solemn as he declares you great royal wife of the 2 lands. The crown settles upon your brow with surprising weight. You resist the urge to shift beneath it. At that moment, the doors to the sanctuary swing wide. A trumpet sounds. You emerge once more into the blinding sun, the air thick with cheering and flower petals. But though you smile and wave as trained, already your mind is elsewhere. You know the stories. Every girl at court whispers them beneath embroidered fans. How queens have risen to command armies, to guide kings, even to rule in their own right. And how they have been poisoned, betrayed, erased from memory as though they had never been. There was Nefertari, beloved of Ramses the Great, whose face still gazes serene from her tomb, yet whose life was marked by bitter rivalry within the palace. There was Nefertiti, queen beside the heretic king Akhenaten, whose very fate remains an enigma. Some say she ruled after him, others that she was cast aside. And there was the formidable Hatshepsut, who seized the throne itself, and whose stepson later chiselled her name from monuments in furious retribution. Such is the double-edged sword of queenship in Egypt. For all the silks and perfumes, the days spent drifting through shaded colonnades or presiding over temple rites, the queen walks a knife's edge, too visible, and she courts jealousy. Too passive, and she invites replacement. Producing an heir may secure her place, or simply paint a target upon her back. And the harem? Ah, the harem. You have not yet set foot within it, but already you know its whispered reputation. A gilded prison where royal wives and concubines jostle for influence, their children pawns in a game older than the pyramids. There, poison is a language as fluent as gossip. Favours are won not with smiles, but with alliances. The queen reigns supreme, or so it seems, until the day she does not. Yet for now, outwardly at least, the world is yours. You are presented to the court in a grand ceremony within the palace's pillared audience hall. The pharaoh himself, a living god in gold and lapis, eyes outlined in kohl, takes your hand before the assembled nobles. His grip is warm, firm, his smile unreadable. Together you stand before the throne of Horus. Together you receive the acclamation of the court. Yet beneath the ceremony's splendour lies another truth. From this day forth, your life is no longer your own. Your days will begin with ritual ablutions, washed in Nile water and anointed anew. You will preside over festivals and offerings, your image paraded before the people as living embodiment of Isis. You will dine in halls of gilded reliefs, where servants move in silence and every glance is weighed for hidden meaning. You will attend councils, your voice measured carefully, too forceful, and you risk seeming grasping, too meek, and you invite dismissal. At night, within your private chambers, you may gaze upon the moonlit courtyards and wonder how many of your predecessors once stood in this very place, dreaming of freedom. The servants who dress your hair and pour your wine know better than to speak of such things. But in their eyes, perhaps, you catch a flicker of understanding. And then there is the matter of an heir. For all a queen's titles and honours, this is the role upon which her true power rests. A male child secures the dynasty, cements your place beside the king. Yet childbirth is perilous. Many a royal wife has gone to the tomb in pursuit of this duty. Amulets will be placed beneath your mattress, spells whispered over your swelling belly. Physicians will hover, their remedies a curious blend of wisdom and superstition. Should the child be a girl, well, you will try again. And should you bear a boy, Rejoicing? Yes. And a subtle sharpening of daggers among the court's rival factions. The life of a queen is not a fairy tale of happy endings. It is a tale of survival, of playing the long game beneath a veneer of divine favour. For every Hatshepsut who rose to rule, there were 10 whose names are lost, their sarcophagi empty, their portraits defaced. But there is power too. With patience, wit, and a keen sense of timing, a queen may shape the destiny of Egypt from behind the throne. She may command armies through her son, sway the priesthood, forge alliances that outlive her rivals. The wise queens do not reach for power too soon, nor wait too long. And so, as the sun sets upon this day of days, you sit within the palace's perfumed inner chambers, your crown newly polished, your fingers stained faintly with henna. The court musicians play softly beyond the screened doorway. The king dines elsewhere tonight, no doubt consulting with his viziers or inspecting temple plans. You sip date wine from a chalice shaped like a lotus. Sweet, yes, but laced with the bittersweet taste of all that lies ahead. You are great royal wife of Egypt, adored, envied, watched from all sides. Behind the silks and gold lies a simple truth. Here, power and peril are one and the same. Sleep well, queen, while you still can. Morning comes not with a gentle nudge, but with the deliberate chime of bronze bells in the dark. You are awake before the first blush of sun gilds the horizon, before even the acolytes have swept the sand from the temple courtyards. The queen must be seen, polished, radiant, otherworldly, before the realm itself stirs. In the stillness of your private chambers, carved cedar screens filter the early light. The air is cool and sweet with lotus and frankincense, for servants have spent the better part of the night burning cones of resin to ensure that no foul spirit lingers come dawn. One can never be too careful, especially when so many around you would delight in your misstep or your sudden absence. A quiet tap at the door signals the arrival of your handmaidens. They enter in perfect silence, their linen robes whispering against the polished stone. The tallest carries a silver basin filled with Nile water and petals of blue lotus. The youngest, a fresh robe spun from linen so fine it is said to be fit for the goddess Hathor herself. Another bears the precious jars, oils of myrrh and cinnamon, sacred unguents meant to anoint the queen and protect her from both harm and blemish. You are guided to the ceremonial bath, an alabaster pool inlaid with turquoise. The water is cold at first, a reminder that even divine skin must endure its earthly trials. Hands smooth and sure cleanse away the oils of the previous day, tracing each limb with practiced reverence. It is not a task performed for comfort, but for symbolism. To remain pure, to remain worthy in the eyes of the gods and of Egypt, one must be reborn with every sunrise. Once dried and wrapped in linen, you are seated before a low mirror of polished copper. Here the transformation begins. Coal is ground fresh, blended with malachite for its vivid green sheen. Not merely cosmetic, but protective, shielding the eyes from the sun's harsh glare and the ever-watchful gaze of rivals. Lips are tinted with ochre, cheeks with a subtle dusting of rouge. A queen must never appear fatigued, no matter the burden she carries, or the sleepless nights spent listening for the scrape of sandals in the corridor. Then comes the hair, an elaborate ritual unto itself. Though your natural tresses are healthy, they are supplemented with strands of imported hair, woven skillfully to achieve the desired length and volume. Some strands may well have been clipped from the heads of foreign captives, a thought you wisely keep to yourself. As the final ornament, a broad collar of gold and faience, is clasped about your neck, you glance at the figure in the mirror. Is this still you, beneath the layers of artifice? A fleeting thought. Queens do not indulge in such luxuries as self-reflection. By the time the temple bells toll the first hour, you're ready to face the day. Your appearance must suggest a woman untouched by mortal concerns, serene, gracious, above the petty dramas of court life. Of course, beneath this polished exterior lies a mind that cannot afford a moment's rest. You are not alone in the palace, not by a long measure. It is a world unto itself, a maze of columned halls and sun-dappled courtyards, vast enough to house an army of courtiers, scribes, priests, and artisans. Within these walls pulse the hidden currents of power and intrigue. Your chief rival may greet you with a smile at this morning's offering ceremony, a smile that does not reach her coal-darkened eyes. She, too, knows that every gesture, every glance is part of an unspoken game. To falter is to invite whispers. To stumble is to risk everything. The harem, though called such, is no mere den of idle pleasure. It is a complex political engine, its chambers echoing with the laughter of children who may one day rise to challenge the line of succession. Among the king's wives and favoured concubines, alliances are forged in secret, loyalties shift with the desert wind. The wise queen learns quickly to cultivate both friends and informants, and to trust neither. There are rituals to attend this morning. The Opet festival draws near, and preparations consume the palace. You will be expected to appear before the high priest of Amun, to offer rich garments and rare spices in the name of divine harmony. A minor ceremony, some might say, but one that offers a stage upon which influence is measured. The queen whose offerings gleam brightest, whose comportment seems most blessed, will find her star rising. And so you glide through the halls, trailing a faint scent of rose and cinnamon. The lesser wives bow low as you pass, their eyes carefully averted. Yet you feel the weight of their gazes upon your back the moment you move beyond sight. In the temple, beneath towering papyrus columns painted in vibrant hues, you kneel before the god's image. Priests chant in ancient tongues as you place your offerings upon the altar. Silks from Byblos, lapis from far-off Afghanistan, unguents crafted by the palace's finest perfumers. Every gift is a message, not only to the gods, but to those who watch from the shadows. As the ritual concludes, you catch the eye of one of the king's chief advisors. He inclines his head with a subtle smile, a gesture of deference, or a warning. One must always wonder. By midday, you are summoned to the Queen's council chamber, a rare privilege granted only to those of highest rank. Here you will hear reports from the palace stewards, matters concerning the granaries, the textile workshops, the progress of temple construction. Dry subjects, perhaps, but each a thread in the greater tapestry of power. Your decisions must be swift, yet careful. Approve too many requests, and you risk appearing weak. Deny them all, and the whispers of tyranny will begin anew. You walk a careful line, each word weighed as though it were gold upon a scale. Among the day's matters is news from the workers' village near Deir el Medina. An illness has swept through the sculptor's quarter, delaying work upon your future tomb. A trivial concern to some, but you know better. The tomb is more than a resting place. It is your insurance against oblivion. The artisans will receive additional rations and amulets for protection. A wise investment. Afternoon brings a quieter respite, though never one entirely free of duty. You dine in a shaded loggia, a breeze stirring the embroidered silks that veil the arches. Servants present delicacies, honey cakes, roast duck, figs dripping with nectar. You eat sparingly, as is expected of one so elevated. A queen must never appear greedy. Indulgence is for the lesser sort. As you sip cool barley beer from a slender goblet, a trusted handmaiden kneels beside you with whispered news. A new consort has arrived from the northern provinces, young, beautiful, and gifted with a voice said to rival the songbirds of the Nile. Already she has caught the king's eye. You smile, a gesture as polished as the alabaster columns that surround you, and you begin to consider your next move. Later, beneath the shadow of the palace's western wing, you visit the royal nursery. The children greet you with wide eyes and eager laughter. Here, among these innocent faces, the true future of Egypt stirs. You kneel to kiss the brow of your son, a prince yet too young to grasp the weight of the crown that may one day rest upon his head. You will teach him, in time, the art of ruling and surviving. Evening falls with a golden hush. The palace grows quieter, though within its stone heart the wheels of intrigue never cease their turning. You retreat to your private apartments, where oil lamps flicker against painted walls depicting lotus and papyrus, symbols of eternal life. There is yet one final duty, a private audience with the king. You are summoned to the inner chamber, where incense curls in lazy spirals beneath the gilded ceiling. The king greets you with the measured affection of a man who must divide his time among many. Your words are chosen with care, your gaze demure yet knowing. You are queen, but you are also counselor, diplomat, enchantress. The roles shift as swiftly as the Nile's current. When at last you return to your bedchamber, the moon rides high above the palace. You sit for a time beneath the open latticework, watching its pale light shimmer upon the stone below. In this quiet hour, the trappings of queenship feel both distant and suffocating. For all the silks and jewels, all the deference and titles, the palace is a cage, one wrought not of iron, but of expectation and vigilance. A single misstep, a whispered rumour, and the queen may find herself cast from its heights to its darkest depths. Yet you are here. You remain. And tomorrow, as the bronze bells chime once more, you will rise again to meet the day's challenges with the grace and cunning that have brought you this far. For such is the life of a queen in ancient Egypt. A dance upon the blade's edge, cloaked in beauty and peril alike. There is a single truth in the palace, that all queens, whether newly crowned or silver-haired with experience, understand from the moment they first pass beneath its painted lintels. Your value lies not in your beauty, nor in your wisdom, nor even in the favour of the king. It lies in your womb. You are great royal wife, yes. But if you cannot produce an heir, and preferably a male heir, your days in these gilded halls may be numbered. No one says it aloud, of course. Court etiquette forbids such crassness. Instead, the expectation settles upon your shoulders like the heavy, broad collar you wear at every ceremony, a constant weight, at once ornamental and oppressive. Already the whispers have begun. You hear them between the polished pillars, where handmaidens exchange knowing glances. You see it in the eyes of the lesser wives and concubines, who watch your every step with thinly veiled anticipation. 1 month has passed since your coronation, then 2. The court astrologers mark the movements of the stars with increasing scrutiny, as if they might coax a royal conception from the heavens themselves. And so begins the most delicate and dangerous chapter of your queenship. It is no simple matter of nature taking its course. No, in Egypt, where the lines between the mortal and divine blur with every sunrise, even the act of producing an heir is shrouded in ritual and superstition. You are bathed in sacred waters drawn at dawn, infused with petals of lotus and fragments of lapis. Priests recite incantations over your garments, your bed, your very breath. Amulets are strung beneath your linen shift, the eye of Horus to guard against miscarriage, the Ankh for life, the frog-headed goddess Heket, midwife of the gods, to ensure safe delivery. Physicians, whose knowledge is equal parts herbal remedy and hopeful guesswork, prescribe strange concoctions, dates soaked in beer and honey, ground pomegranate mixed with frankincense, the occasional live fish, yes, live, pressed gently against the belly to divine the likelihood of conception. One must keep a straight face through such rituals. After all, queens are not afforded the luxury of skepticism. And the king? He too is aware of the stakes, though his attention is divided among many chambers, many women. Still, he dutifully appears when summoned, the union of king and queen being not merely a private affair, but a reenactment of cosmic creation itself. The priests say that in your embrace you embody Isis and Osiris, restoring the divine balance of the land. You try to think of this as you gaze up at painted stars on the ceiling, willing your body to cooperate. When at last the signs of pregnancy appear, a mist moon, a flutter in the belly, the court erupts in barely concealed relief. Musicians play in the courtyards, offerings are made at the temples. You are showered with gifts, fine linens, perfumed oils, and statuettes of Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, her toothy grin meant to ward off evil. But celebration soon gives way to caution, for childbirth, even in the palace, is fraught with peril. The annals of Egyptian history are replete with queens who entered the birthing chamber as goddesses and left it not at all. You are moved to special apartments near the temple of Hathor, patroness of motherhood and joy. Here, midwives attend you day and night, their weathered faces betraying both experience and unspoken concern. The floor is strewn with woven reeds and soft mats, the air thick with incense. One corner of the room is reserved for offerings, dates, honey, and the occasional small figurine of a crocodile, a nod to Sobek, whose protective ferocity is invoked at such times. You might wonder at this eclectic collection of guardians, but when faced with the shadow of death, one cannot be too selective in seeking allies. As the months progress, the court holds its breath. The Queen's pregnancy is no private matter. Every noble, every servant, every soldier watches for signs of progress and of danger. Should you miscarry, the blow to your standing would be immediate, perhaps irreversible. Such was the fate of many a royal wife. History whispers of queens quietly dismissed, their names stricken from records after a series of failed pregnancies. Others fared worse, poisoned by rivals eager to clear the path for their own offspring. One cannot overlook the tale of Queen Mutnejmet, wife of the usurper Horemheb, whose repeated miscarriages were immortalized in temple reliefs, and who vanished from a court soon after. Even a successful birth is no guarantee of lasting security, for if the child is female, the court's rejoicing will be muted, the king's gaze perhaps already drifting to younger, more promising consorts. Should the child be male, the stakes rise immeasurably. When your time comes, the palace enters a hush, broken only by the rhythmic chants of the midwives. You kneel upon birthing bricks, inscribed with spells of protection, gripping amulets so tightly that their impressions remain upon your palms long after. It is said that queens do not cry out, that they bear the ordeal with the stoic grace befitting a living goddess. In truth, the stone walls of your chamber have heard many royal screams, though none are recorded in the official annals. At last, a cry pierces the incense-laden air, not yours, but that of a newborn, a boy. The news spreads like wildfire through the palace. Bells ring out from Karnak. Priests light great fires upon the riverbanks. The queen has borne a prince. The dynasty is secured, for now. But this victory is tempered by reality. You know that even royal infants are not immune to the frailties of flesh. The child is swaddled in the finest linens, placed beneath protective amulets, and watched by wet nurses whose loyalty has been vetted a dozen times over. A single misstep, a single drop of poison slipped into milk, and the triumph of today could become tomorrow's morning. You must be vigilant. Already factions within the palace shift and realign. The mother of the next in line is a powerful force, but also a target. One need only recall the fate of Queen Tia's daughter, murdered in infancy amid court intrigue, her name deliberately forgotten by the chroniclers. Even as you recover, your duties resume. You appear at public ceremonies, the infant prince cradled in your arms beneath a canopy of ostrich feathers. Statues are commissioned in your likeness, inscriptions proclaiming you mother of the god's son. Yet in the shadows, rival eyes glitter with envy. For queens in Egypt, there is no true rest. Having secured your position with an heir, you must now defend it with equal fervour. The harem buzzes with fresh schemes. The lesser wives whose sons must now vie for favour redouble their efforts. The old games resume, more dangerous than before. You attend council meetings with the king, your presence a subtle reminder of your new standing. You cultivate alliances among the priests and the nobility, ensuring that should calamity strike, as it so often does, you have the means to protect both yourself and your son. In private moments, you gaze upon the sleeping child with a mixture of fierce love and cold calculation. This tiny, squirming creature is your greatest triumph and your greatest liability. To raise a future pharaoh is to walk a perilous path, one where each tutor, each nursemaid must be scrutinized, each playmate considered a potential threat. And should the king take another great royal wife, not unheard of should you fall from favour, your task will become even harder. The court has long memories and short loyalties. One must never grow complacent. In time, if fortune favours you, your son will grow strong and wise. You will guide him through a labyrinth of palace politics, teaching him whom to trust and whom to watch with smiling suspicion. And if the gods are truly kind, you may one day witness him ascend the throne, the double crown resting upon his brow. But that day is far off. For now, you remain within the palace's painted cage, every breath a measured act of survival. You have borne an heir. The court's favour is yours. The songs of the priests praise your name. Yet beneath the gold and incense, the game has only just begun. For in Egypt, a queen's worth must be proved anew with each passing moon. To fade from the king's favour, to bear no further children, to falter in the ceaseless dance of courtly intrigue, is to risk the most chilling fate of all, erasure. And so, as the sun sets beyond the desert horizon, you cradle your son beneath the flickering light of oil lamps. You sing softly, an ancient lullaby older than the pyramids themselves. Yet your gaze is not fixed upon the sleeping child alone. It shifts, now and then, toward the shadows that gather at the chamber's edge. For a queen of Egypt, the night is never truly still, and the game is never truly over. The palace is vast. Towering stone colonnades stretch into cool shadowed corridors. Gardens bloom in neat geometric rows, where papyrus rustles in the breeze, and fountains murmur beneath the gaze of carved lions. Courtiers bow and drift past in linen and gold. From a distance, it looks serene, a world ordered and harmonious, as befits the heart of the greatest civilization on earth. Step a little closer, though. Listen beyond the tinkling of harps and the solemn drone of priestly chants. There is another current running through this place, one not spoken of in the official inscriptions. The palace breathes intrigue, and within its breath it whispers one eternal truth. You are never alone. You are great royal wife, mother of a prince, and that makes you a prize target. Around you swirl the other women of the royal household, secondary wives, concubines, foreign princesses sent as diplomatic gifts, and their formidable retinues of ladies-in-waiting and ambitious relatives. Each one has a stake in the unspoken game, and many will not hesitate to play it boldly. There is no official map to this web of rivalries. You must learn its paths and pitfalls through experience, instinct, and trusted spies, though trust itself is a rare and fragile commodity. Even the servants who anoint your brow with sacred oils may carry news of your private moments to ears you'd rather not imagine. By custom, the king's harem occupies a separate quarter of the palace, a walled enclave of luxurious apartments, gardens, and pavilions. Here, many of the royal wives and concubines reside when not summoned to court or to the king's side. In theory, it is a space of beauty and refinement. Music lessons, embroidery, poetry recitations beneath the shade of date palms. In practice, it is a simmering crucible of ambition. You walk the paths of these gardens with measured grace, always with attendants, of course. A queen is never seen wandering alone. That would invite gossip. And gossip here is more dangerous than any serpent lurking in the reeds. There are faces you greet with carefully polite words, eyes you meet with a bland smile that conceals your watchfulness. You know the histories. Nefertari, beloved queen of Ramses the Great, ruled the harem like a goddess in flesh. Yet even she faced the unending rivalry of Isetnofret, a secondary wife whose own son would eventually inherit the throne. The two women vied not only for the king's affection, but for the shaping of Egypt's future. Their courtiers manoeuvred behind silken screens. Their allies whispered in temple halls. At Nefertari's death, her tomb was vandalized. Whether by jealous rivals or the cold hand of courtly politics, none can say. What remains today is both splendid and wounded. You think of such stories often now. They serve as both warning and inspiration. Each new arrival to the palace, each young concubine with eyes like polished obsidian, each foreign princess with her father's promises and her mother's cunning, is a potential threat. The king's heart is easily turned, as history has shown time and again. Queens have been set aside for less than a careless glance at the wrong banquet. Even sisters are not immune to this game. Consider Cleopatra the Seventh, the last and most famous of Egypt's queens. In a world no less treacherous than yours, she eliminated her own siblings to secure the throne. Her brother-husband Ptolemy the 13th was drowned in the Nile after their bitter civil war. Her younger sister Arsinoe was paraded through Rome and later executed at Cleopatra's request. It is a grim reminder that in matters of power, blood offers little protection. You take tea today in one of the palace's shaded gardens, the sandstone walls hung with woven garlands. A small gathering of royal women has been arranged, ostensibly to celebrate the upcoming Opet festival. In reality, it is a subtle test of alliances. The Queen's tea, like all things here, carries its risks. The palace kitchens are well guarded, the chief cupbearer loyal to you, or so he says. Yet poison need not be crude to be effective. A tincture that clouds the mind, a powder that weakens resolve, a slow-acting venom masked by sweet honeyed dates. You sip carefully, smile lightly. The cup never leaves your sight. Conversations drift around you. A young concubine boasts of her skill with the harp. Another praises the king's latest hunting exploits. All harmless on the surface. But beneath the words flow subtle currents of status and intent. Every compliment is a probe, every glance a calculation. One of the lesser wives leans forward, her eyes gleaming. "Your son grows strong, my queen. I hear he bested his tutor in wrestling last week." A harmless comment, or a veiled threat. To draw attention to your son is to draw attention to the ambitions that circle him like vultures. "He is a child," you reply smoothly. "He enjoys his games." You shift the topic with practiced ease, asking after the health of her daughter. To accept flattery is dangerous. To appear defensive, fatal. Such exchanges are endless, their stakes invisible to the casual observer. Many queens of old failed to master them and paid dearly. Queen Ankhesenamun, widow of Tutankhamun, sought alliance with a foreign prince to secure her safety. A bold move that ended with her vanishing from the record. Was she betrayed by a rival? Silenced by the priests? No one knows. Even now, you must wonder which smiles around you conceal knives. The old adage holds true. A quiet tea in the garden can be more dangerous than a battlefield. Your allies are few, and must be cultivated with care. A trusted lady-in-waiting whose family owes you loyalty. A eunuch whose discretion has been purchased with gold and promises. A priestess whose whispered prayers carry double meanings. You build your network slowly, patiently, for haste invites exposure. Yet alliances shift. Friendships sour. Today's confidant may be tomorrow's betrayer. The palace records are rich with such cautionary tales. In quieter moments, you walk among the statues of past queens. Their faces, serene in alabaster or painted with fading pigments, offer no counsel. Yet their stories linger. You think of Tie, wife of Amenhotep III, who wielded immense influence and corresponded with foreign kings, yet whose legacy was nearly eclipsed by the rise of Akhenaten and his religious upheaval. You think of Hatshepsut, who dared to rule as king, donning the false beard of Pharaoh. For years she outmaneuvered her rivals, until her memory was almost entirely erased by the jealous Thutmose III. Such are the lessons you must heed. Power is never given freely. It is seized, defended, and, if one is wise, relinquished only at death. As evening falls, the gathering disperses. Courtiers retreat to their quarters. Musicians pack away their lyres. You linger a moment beneath the stars, the scent of jasmine thick in the air. A new note arrives by the hand of a trusted servant, unsigned, of course. It speaks of a foreign envoy scheduled to arrive in secret tomorrow, bearing gifts for one of the king's newer favourites. Another ripple in the pond, another game to watch. You retire to your chambers, where attendants remove your ornaments and unbraid your hair. In the quiet, you allow yourself a moment of reflection. The palace is beautiful, yes, but it is no sanctuary. It is an arena, one of subtle wars and shifting alliances. Each day is a contest of wit and will, where the stakes are survival and legacy. You share this palace with rivals. And while you walk its painted halls with grace, your heart must remain as sharp as any blade. For in this place of stone and shadow, even a queen must remember. Trust is a luxury, vigilance a necessity. And tomorrow, the game begins anew. You sit beneath the painted ceiling of your private chamber, the walls cool beneath your fingertips. A gentle breeze stirs the linen draperies, carrying the scent of crushed myrrh and blooming acacia. In your lap lies a scroll, a genealogy of your illustrious house, inked by the finest scribes in the land. You unroll it slowly, eyes tracing the names. Father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, uncles, aunts, cousins, many of whom have, in one form or another, become entangled in the great tapestry of your dynasty's lineage. It is a fine thing, they tell you, to have royal blood. The purer, the better. And here in Egypt, purity takes precedence over all else, certainly over more pedestrian concerns of propriety or genetic diversity. You will marry within your family. You know this. Every girl born beneath the palace roof knows this. It is not a matter of preference or affection. It is a duty, a cosmic necessity woven into the very fabric of kingship. The gods themselves set the precedent. Isis and Osiris, sister and brother, husband and wife, created the divine order. To imitate their union is to uphold Ma'at, the sacred balance that holds the universe together. That the practice also serves to consolidate power and property within the royal house is, of course, a fortunate coincidence. Your own match was announced with great ceremony. The court heralds proclaimed it a union of destiny. The high priests invoked the blessings of the pantheon. Privately, you reflected that the match was more likely the result of several tense negotiations behind closed doors. Still, the marriage was sealed, and sealed with blood as well as gold. Your new husband is your brother, or perhaps your half-brother. The lines blur. You have known him since childhood, chased sunbeams across the palace courtyards together. Now you meet beneath the heavy weight of crowns and expectations. The wedding itself was a spectacle. Musicians played beneath canopies of palm fronds. Dancers performed in honour of Hathor, goddess of love and joy. Incense smoke curled toward the heavens as you knelt before the altar. Hands joined beneath a net of golden thread. The priest's voice echoed through the temple halls. By this union, the house of Horus is strengthened. By this union, the land shall flourish. You smiled as expected, your gaze serene beneath the weight of elaborate headdress. The court watched, whispering beneath painted fans. It is the Queen's duty to set the tone after all. Behind the smiles, the truth remained unspoken. Marriages such as this carry risks, as well as rewards. The royal family tree is a twisted thing, its branches curling back upon themselves like the tendrils of a papyrus plant. Sibling marriages, uncle-niece unions, even the occasional pairing of aunt and nephew, all are recorded in the annals of kingship. The line of the Ptolemies would later make an art of such unions, but they were hardly innovators. Consider Akhenaten, the heretic king, and his great royal wife Nefertiti. While their exact relationship remains a matter of scholarly debate, their daughters were later wed to their own relatives, perpetuating a cycle that would culminate in the tragic figure of Tutankhamun. Ah, poor Tutankhamun, the boy king, crowned before his bones had fully hardened. Modern science has laid bare the consequences of his inbred lineage. A cleft palate, a clubfoot, fragile bones prone to breakage. His family line was riddled with genetic maladies, the result of generations of insular unions. Even the treasures of his tomb, glorious though they are, could not conceal the frailty of the young pharaoh they enshrined. You cannot help but wonder what price your own bloodline might yet pay. It is not a thought one can voice within these walls. The priests will tell you that royal blood must not be diluted, that the gods themselves demand it. The courtiers will nod and murmur in agreement, ever eager to align themselves with orthodoxy. Still, the palace midwives whisper tales in the dark. They speak of stillborn infants, of twisted limbs and breathless babes laid silently to rest. The tombs of queens tell a similar story. Many a consort has been interred with tiny coffins beside her, tragic echoes of an unbroken line's hidden cost. And yet the cycle continues. To marry beyond the royal bloodline would be unthinkable, a breach of divine order. The occasional foreign princess may be taken as a secondary wife, her presence a symbol of alliance rather than affection. But the true lineage must remain pure, its sacred essence undiluted. Your own marriage proceeds as court marriages do. You and your brother husband share formal meals beneath painted stars, exchange carefully chosen words in public settings. In private, the dynamic is more complex. Affection, rivalry, duty, resentment, all mingle beneath the silks of your marriage bed. You are aware that your husband's eye wanders. It is expected. No one rules the heart of a king. The greater danger lies in the ambitions of his other consorts, who watch your union with keen interest. A brother's wife may be queen today, but tomorrow, who can say? You have allies, of course. The high priestess of Hathor, whose loyalty has been secured through generous patronage. The captain of the palace guard, whose daughter serves as your handmaiden. Such bonds are as vital as any marriage. Still, you tread carefully. The fate of queens who misstep is no secret. The walls of the palace remember tales that the official chronicles prefer to forget. There was Cleopatra II, whose marriage to her brother Ptolemy VI ended in bitter civil war. Their sibling bond, once celebrated in public ceremony, could not withstand the pressures of shared rule and competing ambitions. Their eventual reconciliation was as much a matter of political necessity as familial affection. Then there was Arsinoe II, who married first the king of Thrace, then her own full brother, Ptolemy II. Her intelligence and political acumen were unmatched, yet her life was marked by the endless necessity of navigating the treacherous waters of court intrigue. You study such examples with care. They offer not only cautionary tales, but blueprints for survival. In moments of private reflection, you wonder how the common people perceive these unions. The artisans who carve your likeness upon temple walls, the scribes who inscribe your name in golden cartouches, do they whisper of the unnatural closeness of the royal house? Or do they accept it as part of the great cosmic order, as immutable as the flooding of the Nile? It matters little. The perceptions of the common folk do not shape palace policy. Power does. And so you play your part. You stand beside your husband at public festivals, your hand resting lightly upon his arm. You present offerings to the gods as a united front. You cultivate the image of harmony and divine favour. Yet beneath the surface, you remain watchful. Should a rival consort bear a son, the balance of power may shift in an instant. Should your own union fail to produce an heir, your position may falter. In this game, there are no guarantees, only the certainty that the dance will continue. Even now, scribes record your marriage in glowing terms. The scrolls will speak of divine union, of the strengthening of the royal line. They will not speak of your private doubts, of the knowledge that the path you walk is both gilded and perilous. You roll the genealogy scroll once more, its inked names seeming to twist beneath your gaze. The gods demand purity, the court demands heirs, the people demand spectacle. Between these demands, the queen must navigate a path as narrow as a knife's edge. You rise from your seat, the cool stone beneath your bare feet grounding you for the tasks ahead. Another day of ceremonies awaits, another round of alliances and calculated smiles. And so you steel yourself. For in Egypt, to marry your brother, your uncle, or worse, is not an aberration. It is a duty, one you will fulfill with all the grace and cunning the role demands. The dance continues. And you, Queen of Egypt, must dance it well. You wake to a dawn as gold as any that has graced the Nile in its long, winding history. The stone columns outside your chamber are bathed in soft light, their painted reliefs of lotus blooms and soaring falcons glowing faintly in the early warmth. It is a beautiful morning, though beauty, as you well know, counts for very little in the halls of power. As great royal wife, you are mistress of the palace in name, favoured consort in ceremony. But beneath the bright surface of this life, you have been cast into a game, one vast, intricate, and merciless. And in this game, even a queen is but a pawn. You did not ask to be moved across this board. Few do. But that will not save you. The viziers plot with soft words and watchful eyes. The priests chant hymns in the open while whispering curses in the dark. Even your own family, whose blood flows in your veins, see you as an asset to be deployed, a prize to be wagered in alliances that may or may not survive the next full moon. And you? You smile, you bow. You move your own pieces in turn, for there is no other choice. You were raised on such stories, of course. What girl of noble blood has not heard of Queen Nefertiti, the favoured wife of Akhenaten, the heretic king who dared to defy the ancient gods? At first, her role was ceremonial, a queen, nothing more. But as Akhenaten's grip on the old order faltered, Nefertiti's power grew. In temple reliefs, she is shown smiting enemies, an honour few queens ever claimed. Some believe she ruled in her own right after his death, under the name Neferneferuaten. Others whisper darker endings, a palace coup, a convenient disappearance. The lesson is simple. A queen may rise in this game, but her ascent is neither guaranteed nor safe. You are summoned this morning not to the king, but to his vizier, a man whose years have taught him the art of masking threats with courtesies. The message is polite, the appointment unavoidable. You seat yourself upon a low, cushioned throne in the audience chamber of the vizier's quarters, flanked by carved images of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance. The irony is not lost on you. He greets you with florid compliments, inquires after your health, your son's progress, the upcoming festivals. Then, with a smoothness born of long practice, he begins to circle the true subject. A marriage, perhaps, between one of your cousins and a minor prince of the Levant. A gift to secure the alliance. Your approval, your involvement, would lend the match the weight of royal favour. You smile, nod, and give the expected answers. And silently, you consider what is not being said. Who benefits from this marriage? What loyalties are being purchased? Which factions will rise or fall if you support this match? And, most importantly, what trap may be woven into the request? Queens are convenient messengers. They are even more convenient scapegoats. You leave the vizier's chamber with polite words exchanged and many more questions unspoken. Your thoughts turn to other examples. Consider Queen Mutemwia, mother of Amenhotep III. Little is known of her, but much can be inferred. Her marriage was likely a political manoeuvre. A foreign princess, perhaps, her presence at court negotiated by embassies and scrolls sealed with wax and wary smiles. When her son rose to the throne, she gained new influence, but only so long as she remained useful. Such is the way of things. Or take Cleopatra VII again, a master of this deadly game. From her earliest years she was trained in the arts of diplomacy and manipulation. When her father Ptolemy XII fled Egypt, it was young Cleopatra who held the palace together. Later, she would align herself with Rome's most powerful men, first Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony, forging alliances that shook empires. Yet even she couldn't outrun the forces arrayed against her. Rome's legions and Octavian's ambitions were a tide too great to turn. Their stories are instructive. They remind you that no alliance is permanent, no favour eternal. You return to your chambers where trusted advisers await. Messages have arrived. One from your brother, now governing a northern province. Another from a foreign envoy seeking audience. Each parchment carries its own implications, its own risks. You must answer carefully, for every word may be read by eyes other than those for whom it is intended. And while these matters unfold, others gather in darker corners of the palace. The priests of Amun watch the king's heretical tendencies with growing concern. Some whisper of ancient prophecies, of rightful bloodlines, and the necessity of sacrifice to restore cosmic order. You are no stranger to such murmurs, nor to the veiled threats they carry. You're not untouched by the machinations of your own kin, either. Your uncle writes often, urging you to press certain causes before the king. A priesthood appointment here, a land grant there. Each request is framed as a favour to the realm, but you know well that favours must be repaid, and debts are dangerous things. You play this game as best you can. You host banquets, where the placement of each guest is a calculated signal. You sponsor temple rites, weaving ties with the priesthood, even as you guard against their ambitions. You present yourself at court as the model of royal virtue, while cultivating discreet channels of information beyond the official scribes. It is exhausting, this life, but it is the life you have. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, you walk the palace gardens beneath the stars. You pass the statues of forgotten queens, their features worn smooth by time. Some were pawns who never moved beyond their first square. Others became queens in truth, players of rare skill who bent the game to their will. You wonder which path will be yours. In these moments you recall the foreign princesses who entered this game with fewer advantages. The Mitanni bride sent to Amenhotep III, the Hittite princesses dispatched to Rameses II. They came with dowries and diplomatic hope, but little else. Many faded into obscurity, their tombs unmarked, their names preserved only in dusty inventories of marriage gifts. And yet a few seized their chance. The Kassite princess who became a queen of Babylon, the Mitanni bride whose letters reveal a keen grasp of court politics. You have more power than they did, but also more enemies. Each day brings new maneuvers. A minor official seeks an audience. A priest hints at omens concerning the king's health. A noblewoman's sudden illness sparks rumours. Was it a natural ailment or the work of unseen hands? Even the king himself is not immune to manipulation. His advisers counsel restraint in foreign policy. Or is it fear? His favoured courtiers press for greater privileges or greater control. You walk a narrow line, seeking to guide without appearing to command. You think again of Nefertiti. At her zenith, she shaped Egypt's destiny alongside Akhenaten. And then, as swiftly as she rose, she vanished. Her disappearance remains one of history's great mysteries. Was it death, exile, assassination? No one knows. The stone faces of Amarna offer no answers. But you have learned this much. In this game, the wise queen prepares for all possibilities. And so, you strengthen your network. You place trusted agents among the palace staff. You cultivate ties with the merchants who supply the court. For information flows where silver passes. You ensure that should the tide turn against you, you will not face it alone. The game continues. It always does. You have seen queens fall for a single miscalculation, a misplaced word, a forgotten alliance. You will not join them. As the sun sets beyond the palace walls, casting long shadows across the painted courtyards, you prepare for tomorrow. Another audience. Another round of calculated smiles and veiled promises. Another step along this treacherous path. You are a pawn, perhaps, but pawns can become queens. And queens, as the old proverb says, can shape the fate of kings. You rise from your seat, the cool stone beneath your feet grounding you once more. The board is set, the pieces move, and you, Queen of Egypt, are ready to play. The sun has not yet cleared the horizon when you are summoned. Already the palace hums with activity. Servants flitting through the colonnades, courtiers rehearsing their lines for the day's ceremonies, priests preparing sacred oils and incense. You rise from your bed of carved ebony and linen, your sleep light as ever. The title of Great Royal Wife brings with it many privileges. Restful nights are not among them. A handmaiden kneels at your side. The High Priest of Amun requests your presence at the Temple of Karnak, my queen. Of course he does. The festival of Opet is upon you once more, a grand spectacle intended to renew the divine power of the pharaoh, and, by extension, the land itself. As Great Royal Wife, you are no mere observer. You are a living embodiment of the goddess Hathor, consort of the sun god Re, and patroness of love, beauty, and fertility. You must play your part with grace. The kingdom, and your standing within it, depends upon it. The transformation begins at once. You are bathed in sacred waters, anointed with unguents of myrrh and cinnamon, dressed in flowing linen, dyed the deep blue of the night sky. A heavy collar of gold and faience encircles your throat, its cool weight both comforting and constraining. Upon your brow, the ceremonial headdress of Hathor gleams, a solar disk nestled between the horns of a cow, symbol of nurturing and divine femininity. You catch your reflection in the polished bronze mirror. The face that gazes back is serene, inscrutable. A goddess, or so they must believe. Outside the temple, the crowds gather in anticipation. The air is thick with incense and expectation. Musicians pluck at lyres, the notes drifting upward like the prayers of the faithful. Priests chant hymns older than the pyramids themselves, their voices echoing through the stone corridors. You make your entrance beneath a canopy of ostrich feathers, flanked by priestesses and guards. The people prostrate themselves as you pass, their cries rising in a tide of devotion. Behold Hathor incarnate. Behold the queen, beloved of the gods. It is a heady experience, this public adoration. Yet beneath the gilded surface lies an undeniable truth. Worship is no shield.